Chapter 8:12. Before Su Ming's voice faded away, the shaman Great Patriarch's body crumbled. The difference between the Great Patriarch and Su Ming in this state was simply too great. Su Ming could kill him in the blink of an eye. There was not a single drop of blood on the killing sword in his hand. It was a telling sign that the Great Patriarch, who had died twice, was not truly made of flesh and blood. Instead, he was a strange existence that was between an illusion and flesh and blood. The art of 9 deaths. In the past, I, Master, and Guru Li Long killed the shaman's Great Patriarch 9 times in succession before he fell into deep sleep. These were not Su Ming's memories in this life. They were memories from the previous life he had gone through during the many cycles of life and death. When the memories from that life appeared in his head, a presence that was even stronger than before, one that surpassed that of a berserker who had attained great completion in the berserker soul realm and was an end shaman, erupted forth with a bang from the space before him. As that presence erupted forth, a fist that was not completely withered shot out from the air and charged towards Su Ming's chest at the speed of lightning. Loud booming sounds reverberated in the air, and when the fist was 7 inches away from Su Ming's body, cracking sounds reverberated in the air. Waves of ice immediately grew on the fist and filled it in an instant, causing the entire fist to turn into an ice sculpture. At the same time, an old man who looked to be in his 50s took a step out from the air behind the fist. His hair was not completely white, but was mixed with some black hair. His body was not as withered as bones, but slightly stronger. He was naturally the shaman Great Patriarch who had been resurrected for the 3rd time. His body, his presence, and his life force seemed to have returned to him as he aged. At that moment, when he walked out and his presence erupted forth, it immediately caused layers of ripples to appear in the air around him. "Sir, since you said that you are an old acquaintance of mine, then who are you?" The Great Patriarch pulled back his frozen right hand. Without even looking at the ice on his arm, he flung his arm, and banging sounds immediately spread out. A black light spread out from his body, intending to destroy the ice. Yet no matter how much the black light covered it, it could not make the ice show even the slightest hint of melting. Instead, it spread out even faster. Only at that moment did the shaman tribe's Great Patriarch's expression change. His heart let out a thump against his chest, and he became even more wary of Su Ming. His 1st and 2nd deaths had made him weak to begin with, so it was within his expectations that he would be killed. His cultivation method had always allowed him to become stronger after he died 9 times. However, this 3rd resurrection had already shown him how powerful he was. Even so, he was unable to melt the ice on his arm. This caused his heart to tremble, and a look of caution appeared on his face. He had lived for far too long, but no matter how he thought about it, he could not find a single figure that could overlap with Su Ming. This caused him to be incredibly uncertain about Su Ming's words. "You will remember," Su Ming said flatly, and took a step towards the old man. At the same time his foot landed, killing intent shone in the eyes of the Great Patriarch of the shamans. With a single move, he formed a seal with his left hand, and as his hands changed rapidly before him, complicated and difficult to understand incantations immediately tumbled out of his mouth. Yet almost at the instant his incantations echoed in the air, Su Ming placed the killing sword horizontally before him, and with 2 fingers on his left hand, he flicked the sword lightly. A clear sword whine reverberated in the air, and within that sword whine was a bloodthirsty roar. It was the roar of the sword spirit. The sword whine spread out and instantly interrupted the shaman tribe's Great Patriarch's incantation. At the instant his incantation stopped, Su Ming lifted the killing sword in his hand and sliced diagonally towards the old man. A sword glare sliced through the sky, and the killing sword in Su Ming's hand drew an arc in the air, with the tip of the sword pointing downwards to the right of his body. The Great Patriarch of the shamans, who was several hundreds of feet away from him, shuddered and was split into 2 before he crumbled. He could not fight against the might of Su Ming's killing sword. In fact, it was difficult for him to even resist it. The difference in their levels of cultivation turned into the difference between life and death before Su Ming, who was already invincible in this world. This is the third death. Su Ming looked at the spot where the great patriarch had died calmly. The killing sword in his hand disappeared, and a large amount of purple smoke appeared out of nowhere around him. That purple smoke instantly gathered on his body and turned into a purple armor. Once it covered his face, it looked as if he had put on a mask. Su Ming lifted his right hand and seized the air to his right. Immediately, purple smoke gathered together with a bang and turned into a gigantic long spear in his hand. That long spear was entirely purple. An indescribably bloody and murderous aura spread out from the Undertaker of Evil's spear. Almost at the instant the Undertaker of Evil's spear appeared, a presence that belonged to the great patriarch that was much stronger than before appeared with a bang in the world. The strength of that presence was already infinitesimally close to the berserker's life cultivation realm. It was also close to the realm of emptiness that came after the shamans and shamans. However, it was only close to it. It had not truly reached it. To Su Ming, this level of cultivation was still far from his current realm. You're slightly stronger than in the past. I remember that a similar level of cultivation only erupted from my sixth death, Su Ming said calmly. During the battle in the past, if his master Tian Xiazi had not cast a strange art and linked their levels of cultivation together to activate a talisman that allowed him to kill the great patriarch 4 times in one go and in the battle, it would have been incredibly difficult for him to make the great patriarch fall into deep sleep. At the instant the great patriarch's incredibly powerful presence erupted, an illusory figure appeared out of nowhere in the distance at an incredible speed and charged towards Su Ming. He was so quick that he looked like an afterimage, and in an instant, he was less than 30 feet away from Su Ming. That figure might be quick, but Su Ming could clearly see that it was a middle-aged man in his 40s. That man had a strong body and was filled with power. The shadow of the crescent moon in his eyes was flashing rapidly at that moment. Su Ming's expression was calm. When the great patriarch closed in on him, he lifted the Undertaker of Evil's spear in his hand and thrust forward. With it, the air looked as if it was about to explode. The presence of Su Ming's life cultivation realm roared, and not only did the tip of his spear shatter space, a large amount of freezing air also spread out from the tip of the spear, causing snow to float down from the sky. This was Su Ming's Atman, his life matrix of midwinter. It spread out from a spear and crashed into the incoming great patriarch with a bang in midair. Yet at the instant they crashed into each other, a malicious sneer suddenly appeared on the great patriarch's lips. Before the tip of the spear even closed in on him, a freezing glare shone in his eyes, and a destructive power erupted from his body. He had chosen to self-destruct. By self-destructing his body, he would bring forth an even stronger wave of destruction that would surpass his full-powered strike before he self-destructed. With this extreme method and the advantage of being able to resurrect, he executed this act of destruction. In truth, at the instant he self-destructed, he had already died for the 4th time. His will was swiftly leaving his exploding body to gather together for his 5th resurrection. Su Ming let out a cold harumph. The momentum of the long spear in his right hand did not change, but he lifted his left hand with the back of his hand facing downwards and his palm facing the sky. Between the past and the future is destiny. As Su Ming spoke, the instant the long spear and the destructive wave of destruction stirred up by the great patriarch's self-destruction crashed into each other. Su Ming swung his left hand in the direction of the self-destructing great patriarch. With it, a change in the power of law appeared on the great patriarch's body after he self-destructed. Since you want to die and self-destruct, then you can do it a few more times. As Su Ming said those words, the great patriarch's body, which was about to self-destruct, came to an abrupt halt, then fell backwards. As if time was flowing in reverse, he swiftly gathered together from his crumbling state. Once he turned back into his body, with a hint of absent-mindedness in his eyes, he discovered to his shock that his will had been forcefully kept in his body, as if time was flowing in reverse. He could not leave. Since he could not leave, This body became the fifth time he had woken up. This was the first time in his long life that he had encountered such a shocking thing. Before this, he had never experienced anything like this before. In the midst of his shock, when his body recovered from its crumbling and self-destruction against his will, his body self-destructed once again. This was not what he wanted. This was caused by Su Ming controlling the changes between the past and the future. A wave of terror rose madly in the great patriarch's heart, and his body crumbled and exploded with a bang. His will dissipated, and this was the fifth time he died. Yet soon, he discovered in despair that when his mind cleared up once more, he was still right before Su Ming, and under the terrifying law of time, flowing in reverse, he still self-destructed. The sixth time he died. The seventh time he died. When the great patriarch died for the eighth time, at the instant he self-destructed and his will dissipated, he let out a roar filled with desperation. As he roared and his will was about to scatter, a talisman suddenly appeared before him. As it shone, it extracted his will and fused it into the talisman, then forcefully rushed out of Su Ming's destiny and disappeared into midair. You finally managed to summon this item. A brilliant glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Almost at the same time the talisman disappeared, he lifted his left hand and seized the talisman. Yet the moment he touched the talisman, he grabbed air. The talisman did not exist at all. How many people have tried to snatch my supreme treasure over the countless years, but none of them have been able to touch it? How can you be an exception? The great patriarch's low roar came from the talisman that was about to disappear. When Su Ming saw that most of the talisman had disappeared, a freezing glare appeared in his eyes. He no longer bothered with the great patriarch's voice. Freezing air instantly filled his left hand, making him look like an ice sculpture. This was Su Ming gathering all of his life matrix and Atman on his left hand. Once he did so, he seized the talisman with his left hand once again. This time, at the instant his left hand touched the talisman, a loud bang rang out in Su Ming's head. That rumble was a voice roaring at the sky, shouting for words. Life of 9 deaths. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He knew that this voice had appeared because he was not seizing the talisman with a normal method, but had used his own life matrix to touch it. You. A roar filled with disbelief swiftly came from the talisman. There was also a shrill note in that roar, and there was shock in it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:13. So life matrix can be used this way. Understanding appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The talisman itself was a treasure. It contained the presence of life and could be used to bestow life upon others. If the great patriarch obtained this talisman and fused it into his body, he could change his life and turn it into a life with 9 deaths. Su Ming yanked the talisman with his hand, and with a rip, a small part of the talisman was torn off. The remaining part disappeared without a trace. Outsiders can bestow life upon others to increase their level of cultivation, but this method is the same as pulling up seedlings to help them grow. It was the same for Sima Xin in the past. Su Ming's understanding towards life matrices became deeper. As the remaining half of the talisman disappeared in midair, the destructive ripples caused by the great patriarch's self-destruction spread out and crashed into Su Ming's long spear, turning into a loud bang that shook the sky and earth that swept outwards in all directions. The entire ground trembled due to the explosion. Cracks appeared on the ground, and a large amount of seawater surged in from all directions, causing nearly a fourth of the god of Shaman's island to be submerged in an instant. Circles of ripples continued spreading outwards in midair. Some of the shamans did not manage to dodge in time, and their bodies were reduced to ashes. The ripples continued spreading into the distance before they gradually disappeared. Su Ming walked out of the air where the ripples had disappeared. He was not injured in the slightest. At the instant he self-destructed, he had already stepped into the dimension in the fragment he had prepared a long time ago. When he walked out, he looked towards the shaman's sacred mountain, because at that moment, a ripple that surpassed his level of cultivation erupted from within the sacred mountain. A figure sat cross-legged on the peak of the sacred mountain along with the ripples. It was a young man who appeared to be only 18 or 19 years old, but his body gave off an ancient aura. He sat there cross-legged, and his eyes had been completely replaced by the glow of a crescent moon. Anyone who looked into his eyes would feel as if their mind were being sucked in. There was half a piece of yellow paper stuck to his forehead. There was a runic symbol flashing on it. That runic symbol was incomplete, but it could still be seen that it was in the shape of a crescent moon. The boy looked at Su Ming and said languidly, "I remember who you are. You were the one who fought against me with Tian Xiezi and Guru Li Long in the past. Su Ming, the moon waxes and wanes. If a man dies 9 times and lives 9 times, all he seeks is perfection. This is bestowed by this old man's master, a life of 9 deaths." The boy looked at Su Ming, who was several thousands of feet away from him, then slowly stood up and wrapped his fist in his palm to bow towards him. "I haven't." When the teenager wrapped his fist in his palm, he lifted his head to look at Su Ming. At that moment, the great patriarch's presence had changed too much. Compared to before, he looked like a completely different person. The coldness of midwinter is the end of life. Winter, autumn, summer, and spring are the lives I have come to understand. Su Ming looked at the boy who was the great patriarch, then swung his arm, wrapped his fist in his palm, and bowed slightly. The great patriarch of the shamans who had turned into this boy was something that Su Ming had never seen in his memories of the cycles of reincarnation. He remembered that during the 9th resurrection of the shaman's great patriarch, he had been a man in his 30s. Yet now, he had turned into a teenager. Clearly, the younger the great patriarch's life of 9 deaths was, the stronger his level of cultivation would be. At that moment, it could be seen that the great patriarch had become much more refined compared to the past. He also had a deeper understanding towards the life of 9 deaths he had been bestowed upon him. My master once said that it's very difficult for me to control the lives he bestowed upon me and have them fuse perfectly with me. Unless I practice until I reach the stage where I become a nascent soul after 9 deaths, only then will I be able to master this life. Sir, I've gained a lot from my battle today, and I'm showing signs that I'm about to reach a breakthrough. Please give me some guidance so that I can reach a breakthrough. I will never forget this great kindness." When the teenager heard Su Ming mentioning his life of understanding himself, excitement immediately appeared on his face. He bowed towards Su Ming once again, then slowly rose into the air. Once he floated 1,000 feet away, he lifted his right hand and struck the sacred mountain behind him through the air. Booming sounds instantly came from the mountain, and gradually it was no longer flickering in an illusion. Instead, it had completely gained corporeal form, and a gigantic crack appeared on the mountain. As booming sounds echoed in the air, the mountain gradually split into 2. A ray of dark light flew out from within and landed before Su Ming. It was a coffin Su Ming had seen in the past. "This is the item that made you cry the second time I saw you. This item came from the immortals, and they want to corrode you with death aura. You came here for this item, and I will give it to you as a gift." Determination and fanaticism shone in the teenager's eyes. At that moment, he looked completely different from the great patriarch Su Ming had seen previously. At that moment, he looked more like a life seeker who was willing to give up everything for the sake of reaching a breakthrough in his level of cultivation and fusing with a 9 deaths life. Searching for his life matrix to complete himself was called life seeker. Su Ming looked at the teenager's eyes carefully. He could not see any cunning or schemes in them. He could only see the determination to fuse with the 9 deaths life and search for a breakthrough. This determination was very similar to Su Ming's in certain aspects. "Besides this coffin, I also need 9 Li's blood in your physical body." Su Ming looked at the coffin before him, and his expression gradually turned gentle. A hint of melancholy and nostalgia rose in his heart. Once he put away the coffin, he spoke languidly. The teenager fell silent. After some time, A carefree smile appeared on his face. He lifted his hands and clapped them together. With it, the lines on his palms shone, and as they changed, a transparent coffin appeared before him. That coffin was not big, and since it was transparent, Su Ming could see a dried-up skeleton lying inside. As he looked at the skeleton, the teenager lifted his right hand and tapped the center of the skeleton's brows. A drop of purple blood that exuded a thick presence of the shaman tribe flew out, and as the teenager swung his arm, that drop of blood charged toward Su Ming. Su Ming seized the air with his left hand, and a jade bottle immediately appeared in his hand. Once he poured that drop of blood into it, the color of the jade bottle immediately turned purple. I've devoured the blood of all the previous shaman lords of 9 Li and refined them into 9 drops of shaman essence blood. I originally thought that this blood could help me reach a breakthrough, but it was useless even after so many years. I'll give you 4 drops. Please enlighten me. The teenager patted the coffin, and it immediately fell to the ground. The moment the coffin fell to the ground with a bang, a powerful light appeared in the teenager's eyes. He lifted his right hand swiftly and pointed at the half of the runic symbol at the center of his brows. Immediately, a gentle light spread out from that runic symbol. Once it enveloped his entire body, the teenager started growing rapidly, as if time was flowing by several times over his body. His hair gradually grew longer, and a light started flowing out of his skin. His body also slowly grew larger, and from a teenager, he turned into a young man of about 25 or 26 years of age. At the same time, overlapping shadows suddenly appeared on his body, and a person walked out from within. It was naturally the teenager. He pointed at his 25 or 26-year-old self and looked at Su Ming. This is my 8th anima, the life of a young man. The moment he spoke, a glint appeared in the young man's eyes, and time flowed on his body once again. In the blink of an eye, he turned into someone in his 30s, and overlapping shadows appeared on his body again. This time, the young man walked out of the overlapping shadows and stood beside the teenager. He pointed at his 30-something self and looked at Su Ming. This is my 7th anima, the life of the prime of life. This strange sight caused a focused look to appear in Su Ming's eyes. He saw the man in his 30s growing once again. When he looked to be in his 40s, the same thing happened. This is my 6th anima, the life of middle age. This is my 5th anima, the life of 50 years. This is my 4th anima, the life of dusk. At that moment, there were 5 great patriarchs of different ages standing by the boy's side. They were old men whose hair had turned white from their youths to their temples. At the same time, the passing of time continued on the body of the old man, with white sideburns and white hair. This is my 3rd anima, the life of old age. This is my 2nd anima, the life of desire decay. This is my 1st anima, the life of a candle withering. The last person to appear beside the boy was the shaman tribe's great patriarch, who Su Ming had seen for the first time. His face was covered in an aura of death, and his teeth were so yellow that they were almost gone. He stood beside the boy with a pair of eyes that looked like crescent moons. And I am in my 9th anima. The boy looked at the 8 versions of himself of different ages standing beside him. When he spoke softly, he looked at Su Ming, and determination appeared in his eyes. This is my life of 9 deaths. Fellow Taoist Su, please grant me your teachings. Su Ming remained silent for a moment. He looked at the boy and the 8 great patriarchs of different ages standing beside him. After a long while, he pointed at the coffin on the ground. What life is he in? The boy was momentarily stunned. When he lowered his head to look at the coffin on the ground, his body suddenly started trembling. A hint of understanding gradually appeared in his eyes, but it was still not clear. Moving from a life of a candle withering to the crying infant is the same as moving from death to new life. This path of life is somewhat similar to what I have come to understand, but it is different. Su Ming remained silent for a moment. When he spoke, he lifted his left hand, and immediately snowflakes appeared on his palm. Freezing air spread out from the snowflakes and filled the area. This is my life. Su Ming looked at the snowflakes drifting down from his palm. As he spoke, the snowflakes gradually changed color. They were no longer white, but had turned red. They were not crimson red, but the color of autumn. A faint wave of life force was mixed in with midwinter, and it turned into the will of autumn. Do you understand now? Su Ming swung his left hand, and the will of autumn on the snowflakes in his hand disappeared. The boy shuddered. Confusion and absent-mindedness appeared in his eyes, along with understanding and ignorance. He had a vague feeling that he seemed to have understood something, but he could not see what was going on. Moving from death to life requires true death, and you know that you will not die. The life of 9 deaths might seem like you will not die, but in truth, this will of not dying has caused you to lose your desire to live. How can you talk about living when you are like this? Su Ming asked faintly. The boy shuddered. When he lifted his head, he stared at Su Ming in a daze. After a long while, a resolute look appeared on his face. He lifted his right hand and struck the coffin that was his physical body on the ground through the air. With a bang, the coffin shattered and the physical body inside shattered. The remaining 5 drops of shaman essence blood flew out. The boy swung his arm and swept them towards Su Ming. I will remember your kindness. The boy wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply towards Su Ming. For the annual event, please vote for the annual work category. I don't recommend spending money, as long as there are free tickets. I don't care about the rankings. Although I haven't won first place in the past few years, I have won quite a few prizes. Everyone could just follow the event and have fun. Monthly votes and recommendation votes are more important. I'm asking for monthly votes and recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Chidian. Come and cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 814. Su Ming did not have any deep grudge against the shaman tribe's great patriarch. It did not matter whether it was his previous life in the cycles of life and death or his current life. There was no grudge between them. The only thing worth mentioning was their meeting during the battle between the shamans and berserkers. Su Ming had not expected that the battle would end like this, but it was not entirely impossible. It was especially so for Su Ming to see something familiar about the great patriarch. It was a struggle to walk from death to life. It was a life of 9 deaths. However, it was incredibly difficult for him to perfect and fuse with this life that was given to him by someone else. With all the shaman essence blood, Su Ming left God of Shaman's Island. When he left, the great patriarch personally sent him off 1,000 lease and wrapped his fist in his palm to bid him farewell. From then on, he would still be cultivating 9 lives, but he would only be 9 lives. If he died during his 9th resurrection, then he would never be able to wake up again. This was because he had destroyed his physical body. This action might seem stupid, but only Su Ming and the boy knew that if he did not destroy something, he would not be able to build something. If he did not want to live, how could he lust for life? If he did not lust for life, how could he go against the heavens? The boy looked at Su Ming and said seriously, I will remember this kindness. If you ever need my help in the future, I will definitely return this kindness. He knew that this sort of enlightenment was a serendipity that could only be found by chance. This sort of enlightenment also let him know that his previous path was wrong, and now he had to change it. Su Ming looked at the shaman tribe's great patriarch, and after a moment of pensive silence, he spoke languidly. I won't kill you because your path of life cultivation is similar to mine. I want to see whether you can go through the metamorphosis from death to life, but this is between you and my eldest senior brother. If my eldest senior brother wants to kill you, then I will attack. The boy smiled faintly. The blood of 9 Li is not passed down through the direct line of descent. It can be awakened in all those who possess the blood of 9 Li. I have killed many of the lords of 9 Li who had yet to grow up, but I did not harm a single member of your eldest senior brother's family. I admit that I chased after his life in the past. But my physical body has already scattered. From now on, there will no longer be a great patriarch of the Shaman tribe. I will only be a person searching for my path of life. All my grudges will disappear with the death of my physical body. If he comes looking for me, I will get it to him." The young man smiled and raised his head to look at the sky. His expression revealed a kind of understanding towards life and death. "I'll be heading to the alliance of the Western region and Northern province soon. I'll bring the berserkers from Eastern wastelands to kill all the immortals. There should be shamans in those two continents as well." Su Ming looked at the boy. The boy remained silent for a moment before he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards Su Ming once again. "At that time, I am willing to travel with you." Su Ming did not speak anymore. He turned around and walked into the distance. The big black dog that was the bald crane followed behind him, and by its side was the yellow mutt. As for Yu Xian, she was sitting on the mutt with a grin on her face. She had gained quite a lot from this trip to the land of the shamans. In a great mood, she grabbed the mutt's fur, causing it to run a few steps faster with a long face. When it caught up to Su Ming, Yu Xian looked at him expectantly. "Dummy Su, where are we going now?" Su Ming's expression was calm. He walked in midair and cast his gaze into the distance. He did not intend to immediately return to the ninth summit. After all, even if he had the shaman source blood, his second senior brother only had a slight chance of helping his eldest senior brother recover. A shaman dragon. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt, and he turned his head around to look in another direction. That was where Western Sea Clan's island was located. Besides Western Sea Island, Su Ming had already visited all the 3 islands of South Morning. When Su Ming cast his gaze towards Western Sea Island, Yu Xian's smile instantly grew brighter. She blinked and became filled with anticipation. She believed that she should be able to obtain quite a lot of rewards from Western Sea Island. She naturally treated these rewards as the interest she obtained from Su Ming. She also felt that this sort of life was pretty good. Su Ming intimidated the people in front of him while she looted from behind. "Su Ming, when are you going to go to the immortal sects in the other continents?" "I'll go and cheer for you," Yu Xian said with a grin. Her face was filled with excitement. "You've looted quite a lot from God of Shaman's Island," Su Ming said flatly. Yu Xian's eyes immediately went wide. The excitement instantly disappeared, replaced by wariness. "What do you want to do?" "I didn't loot a lot, just a little bit." "If you don't believe me, you can ask little Baldy," Yu Xian immediately said. "The immortals in the other continents are right there. You can go and snatch them yourself. With your level of cultivation, it won't be difficult for you to do this." Su Ming looked at Yu Xian. "I'm a kind person. How could I do something like snatching other people's things? This sort of thing is too troublesome. If I'm not careful, someone will know about it. Besides, I don't have any grudge against them, so there's no reason for me to snatch their things. But it'll be different if I follow behind you." Yu Xian winked. "I want 9/10 of all the things you looted," Su Ming said calmly. 8/9. Why don't you just go and snatch them?" Yu Xian instantly panicked. Without caring about her image, she stood on the mutt's body, and her expression changed. "I've always been snatching them." Su Ming looked at Yu Xian and refused to budge. 1/10. "I can only give you 1/10 at most. You have to know that this is my hard-earned money, and there's also my capital, and no matter what, I can only give you 1/10, Yu Xian said with a huff with her eyes wide open. "If you weren't around, I could have obtained all of it myself. I know how to perform Soul Seek. I can find where they hide their treasures, and it'll save you a lot of trouble. Just destroy the sect. Don't perform Soul Seek. I can help you open their rune so that the berserkers won't have to suffer so many casualties," Yu Xian immediately said. Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence, but before he could finish speaking, a thought appeared in Yu Xian's head, and the mutt beneath her immediately turned into a long arc and charged into the distance with her. "Su Ming, you must be tired. Why don't you let me handle Western Sea Island? It's just a shaman dragon, right? I'll go and get it for you." As Yu Xian left into the distance, her clear voice traveled into the air. Judging by the direction she was heading to Western Sea Clan's island. Su Ming's expression was one of indifference. He smiled faintly and moved towards Western Sea Island at a moderate pace. Understanding appeared on the face of the black dog that was the bald crane by his side. It looked at Su Ming, then at Yu Xian, who was leaving into the distance, then bared its teeth and smiled. "Looks like this Su Ming is also a cunning person. I'll have to be more careful in the future. The bald crane suddenly missed Qian a little. It felt that Qian was still the best. He was so stupid that it could bully him as it pleased. Yu Xian was incredibly quick. When Su Ming arrived outside Western Sea Island, loud booming sounds reached his ears, along with dragon roars echoing in the air. Western Sea Island's rune was also trembling and distorting at that moment. With one step, Su Ming passed through the island's rune and stepped onto Western Sea Island. When he looked over, he found that the island was about the same size as Freezing Sky Clan's island. The land was filled with mountains and forests, and in the distance was a huge yellowish-brown dog that was several tens of thousands of feet big. It was roaring at the ground in midair, and as it roared, violent gusts of wind raged. Layers of ripples spread out from its mouth, and wherever those ripples went, the mountains would crumble and the earth would crack. Yu Xian cast some unknown divine ability above the big yellow dog's head, and storage bags, spirit stones, and various enchanted treasures were charging toward her from all directions as if they were being sucked in. Yu Xian quickly put them away, as if she was afraid that if she was too slow, Su Ming would come and snatch them from her. There were dozens of Western Sea Clan's sect elders before the big yellow dog. They were fighting back with everything they had, but their bodies were being forced to retreat against their will. Su Ming stood on a mountain, and once he sat down cross-legged, he looked at the scene in the distance. He did not attack, but as he swept his gaze across the area, he spread his Atman outwards and covered Western Sea Island. After a moment, he looked towards the northern side of Western Sea Island. That place was filled with forests, but in the depths of the forest was a pond. The water in that pond was clear, and there was a wooden house beside it. Su Ming stood up. He did not bother himself with Yu Xian looting the place or the mutt flaunting its prowess. With one move, he charged towards the northern part of the forest. The bald crane hesitated for a moment, and when it slowed down slightly, it turned around and charged towards the ground. It wanted to see whether it could obtain some benefits during the chaos. Su Ming walked into the northern part of the forest. As the low growls from a mutt in the sky continued echoing in his ears, he arrived at the depths of the forest, right outside the pond and the wooden house. When he got closer, the noise outside seemed to have largely disappeared, and a sense of tranquility rose within him. A friend has come from afar. I have not been a good host. The moment Su Ming stepped into the place, a hoarse and old voice came from the wooden house. Along with that voice was an old man with a head full of white hair, dressed in sackcloth. He walked out of the wooden house slowly and looked towards Su Ming. His eyes were as clear as the water in the pond, and there was a presence that could capture souls. When he looked towards Su Ming, he narrowed his eyes slightly. I am Li Long, greetings, god of berserkers. The old man remained silent for a moment before he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards Su Ming. Su Ming looked at the old man. He could sense a hint of power that surpassed great completion in the Berserker Soul realm and was half a step in a life cultivation realm. However, that trace was very faint and had not stabilized. The old man looked at Su Ming and asked in a low voice, May I know why you have come here? God of Berserkers? Su Ming looked at the pond and asked flatly, Western Sea Island is too small. The land of South Morning has already shattered. Are you willing to move to another place and build up Western Sea Clan? Oh, a barely noticeable glint appeared in Li Long's eyes. You're already half a step into life cultivation realm. You chose this place to quietly train and ignore the matter of Western Sea Clan's intruders. You must have gained some sort of epiphany and are seeking to move into life cultivation realm. Life cultivation realm requires you to know your destiny. What is your destiny? Su Ming turned around and looked at the old man with bright eyes. Li Long fell silent. Su Ming did not continue speaking. Instead, he went to the side of the pond and looked at it without a single word. He could see a pair of eyes looking at him from the bottom of the pond, and within those eyes was wariness, fear, and respect. Li Long remained silent for a moment before he spoke hoarsely. I'm about to rot. How could I know my destiny? Su Ming did not speak anymore. Instead, he crouched down and placed his right hand on the pond. Immediately, ripples appeared on the surface of the pond, and gradually, a gigantic head rose from the water. It was a dragon's head that was several dozens of feet big. It was a shaman dragon covered in scales. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:15. Its head floated up from the pool and looked at Su Ming. There was respect and fear in its eyes. It could sense the barely discernible presence coming from Su Ming's body, and the strength of that presence was something it had never seen before. He stroked the dragon's head gently. When Su Ming stood up, the shaman dragon seemed to have sensed his intentions. As its body trembled, more ripples appeared on the surface of the pool. It opened its mouth slowly, and as its body twisted, it spat out a ball of blood the size of a fist. That ball of blood exuded a pure presence of the shaman tribe. That ball of blood gradually floated towards Su Ming and stopped before him. Once it did so, the shaman dragon's face became slightly dispirited. It lowered its head respectfully towards Su Ming before slowly sinking back into the pool. Su Ming took the ball of blood, cast it a glance, then put it away into his storage bag before turning around and walking out of the forest. He did not say a single word to Guru Li Long. He had already given him a chance, but it was clear that Guru Li Long had chosen to reject it. When he asked for Su Ming's life, he did not want an answer, but to ask for it. However, Guru Li Long did not search for it. Instead, he calmly said that he was about to rot away. If Su Ming truly only had the memories of this one style, and had only cultivated for hundreds of years, then perhaps he would not have immediately understood the meaning behind those words. However, he had experienced far too many things, and those dozens of reincarnations were equivalent to dozens of lives. This was not something Guru Li Long could compare to. The meaning behind his words was that he was looking down on Su Ming from the bottom of his heart. He was not looking down on Su Ming's level of cultivation, but on his age. To Guru Li Long, Su Ming was indeed the god of berserkers, but he was too young. He was so young that Guru Li Long could not completely acknowledge him and be willing to lower his head and allow him to guide him. If Su Ming was an old man who had been famous for many years, then Guru Li Long would have a completely different result. If that was the case, Su Ming would naturally not say anything else. When he turned around and left, he gradually walked into the distance. Behind him, Guru Li Long watched him leave with a slightly complicated expression. He also knew that he had rejected a chance. Perhaps this chance could have allowed him to reach a breakthrough in his level of cultivation, but perhaps it would not. After all, the god of berserkers before him was so young that it was difficult for him to acknowledge him. In fact, his mentality was similar to that of many people. They often believed that those younger than them could not be trusted. Even if their cultivation was higher than theirs, it was difficult to change this attitude in their hearts. As Su Ming left into the distance, Guru Li Long's gaze followed him. But when Su Ming was 1,000 feet away and a small part of his body was hidden by the forest, Guru Li Long's pupils suddenly shrank. He vaguely felt that this figure was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. However, this memory was clearly very old, and it was difficult for him to recall when he had seen this similar figure. "Sir God of Berserkers, have we met before?" Li Long asked after a moment of hesitation. "No." When Su Ming spoke, he disappeared into the forest. They had seen him before, but at that time, Su Ming did not look like this. He had been an ancient old man, and he looked different from his current self. Once he walked out of the forest, Su Ming did not turn his head back. He walked straight out of Western Sea Island, and the instant he was about to step out of the island, he sent a faint voice towards Yu Xian, who was excitedly sucking in a large amount of storage bags, crystals, and enchanted treasures in the sky. "Are you done playing? I'm leaving." Once Su Ming finished speaking, he walked out of Western Sea Island. Once he stepped out of the ruin, he charged towards Freezing Sky Clan's island. He had already obtained all the items he needed, and now he was going to work with his second senior brother to cast his art and wake his eldest senior brother up. Almost the moment Su Ming left, Yu Xian let out a cheer and patted the gloomy mutt that had grown to several tens of thousands of feet. The mutt felt incredibly aggrieved. It was an incredibly noble abyss dragon, but its young mistress had insisted that it turn into a mutt. And the most outrageous thing was that even if it had turned into the size of several tens of thousands of feet, it still did not allow itself to turn into an abyss dragon. It could only maintain the mutt's appearance. When it left, it turned around and cast a fierce glance at the thousands of Western Sea clan members who had surrounded and attacked it previously, but had all been scattered by its roars. With a harumph, it turned into a long arc and charged away. There was still a black shadow chattering excitedly on the ground. When it saw the big yellow leaving in the sky, the bald crane also quickly left with a reluctant look on its face. Eastern wastelands and South Morning were in a state of relative peace in the land of berserkers. Countless berserkers were gathering together, and within a few days, they would head to the alliance of the Western region and Northern Province. At the same time, Su Ming left Western Sea Island. Yu Xian, the mutt, and the bald crane swiftly left. Beyond the berserker's sky, beyond Death Vortex, which contained numerous entrances to fragments of the world, there were more than several thousands of longships around the 9 gigantic cultivation planets. There were several cultivators dressed in black, standing on each of those longships, and there was a picture of a planet on each of their robes. The picture of the planet was incredibly realistic, causing them to look as if they did not have bodies when they stood on the longships in the galaxy. It was as if they had fused together with the galaxy. Besides the thousands of longships, there were nearly 100,000 immortals in the area. All of them had respectful expressions on their faces, and not a single sound could be heard. At that moment, there was a young man standing on a longship right in front of the group. That young man had a head full of black hair that danced in the air. He had a handsome face, but his lips were thin, and there was a faint hint of arrogance on his face. His robes were different from the others. The constellations on the others' robes were still and unmoving, but only the constellations on his robes were rotating slowly. It looked incredibly bizarre, as if his robes were a world itself, and they had their own movements. There were 8 people surrounding the young man like stars surrounding the moon. These 8 people were all old, and all of them were clearly lords of world planes. "You just mere mortals. I came here, but the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors did not come to greet me," the young man said flatly. "Young master, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, there's no need to say anything. My status in the sect is not high enough. If my big brother came, they would have come to flatter him a long time ago." The young man waved his hand, and his expression turned dark. "Young master, this is—" The 8 immortals around the young man smiled wryly, and when they looked at him, their gazes were filled with respect. "Is this the Death region that you immortals have been guarding for generations?" The young man's gaze fell on Death Vortex in the galaxy. "This is Death region." An old immortal beside the young man immediately answered respectfully. "Rumor has it that Death region contains a power that can destroy the entire true morning Tao world." A glint appeared in the young man's eyes. He walked out of the longship and stood in the galaxy. As he looked at Death Vortex in the distance, an interested look appeared on his face. "Since it possesses this sort of power, then if I become the sect master of Morning Tao sect in the future, I will definitely send people to investigate this place at full force." The young man moved, intending to get closer to investigate. However, he had just moved less than 1,000 feet when he suddenly stopped. His expression changed drastically because 99 presences had suddenly appeared in the boundless starry sky outside the Death Vortex. Behind the 99 presences, there were 49 even more powerful wills lingering. As expected, there are 99 tiger talismans and 49 dragon talismans suppressing Death region. The young man hesitated for a moment, but he did not go deeper. Instead, he turned around and returned to his longship. "All right, I'm just passing by. I can only stay for 7 days. You must gather the spirit stones I asked you to within 7 days." The young man stood on the longship and cast a cold glance at the immortals beside him. The immortals smiled wryly. One of the middle-aged men hesitated for a moment before he moved forward and spoke in a low voice. "Young master, please give us a few more days. The number of spirit stones you want is too great. We will need some time to prepare them, 7 days. Not even one more day. If we can't get enough spirit stones." Haha. The young man's expression immediately turned cold. "Young master." One of the immortals suddenly took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, "Young master, you seem to be very interested in Endeth region. I have a way for you to enter Endeth region without activating the suppressing spirit talismans." Oh, a glint immediately appeared in the young man's eyes, and he looked towards the old immortal who had spoken. "That's right. If your method is truly effective, then I can give you a few more days, but if it doesn't work, then the time limit will remain the same for 7 days, but the number of spirit stones will be doubled. Don't worry, young master. Please." The old man smiled faintly and immediately spoke. The others hesitated for a moment, but they did not say that the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors had already given their orders. They were not allowed to activate the rune and send people to descend. They would only activate it when they returned. Several hours later, thousands of longships were spread out in the region, filled with an endless amount of continents in the Immortals' galaxy. The Immortals surrounded the young man and guided him to the continent and altar at the center, which was where Su Ming's physical body was located. The young man cast a glance at Su Ming's physical body. Then, as if he had remembered something, he asked coldly, "He's that be Tisic's older brother?" "Young master, you're wise. That's him. The method to enter Endeth region is to use his physical body to activate the rune, but we need 2 days to prepare, and once we descend, our levels of cultivation will be limited. We can't send too many people." "It's fine." Tao Slave 19, 21, 31, 41, 51, the 5 of you stepped forward. The young man was completely unbothered. As he spoke, 5 people in black immediately disappeared from the ships around him. When they reappeared, they were already behind the young man. "Activate the rune. With the 5 of them protecting me, even the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors won't be able to do anything to me." The young man lifted his right hand, and a fan appeared in his hand as he spoke smugly. As the Immortal's rune was slowly activated, the moon and stars in the land of berserkers became sparse. The sea breeze blew, causing the surface of the sea to stir up ripples that looked like silver leaves under the moonlight. They brought with them a wave of dampness that crashed into the walls of the mountains. Once they shattered without a sound, they were swept up by the incoming wind and scattered into the distance. It had been 2 days since Su Ming returned to the 9th summit. At that moment, he was sitting cross-legged on the cliff of the 9th summit. His expression was calm, but there was also vigilance. He had his Atman spread out in all directions, and if there was even the slightest movement, he would immediately notice it. Second senior brother was sitting cross-legged by his side, and he was spreading out his divine soul at full power to stir up the power of heavenly phantom in the land of berserkers to wake up eldest senior brother. As for Hu Zi, he was snoring, using infiltration to protect his eldest senior brother's will. It did not matter whether it was second senior brother or Hu Zi. They could not be interrupted while they were casting their arts, or else, not only would eldest senior brother not be able to wake up, even second senior brother and Hu Zi's lives would be in danger. Su Ming's task was to protect them. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 816. This act of protection was incredibly important to Su Ming. It was even more important than his life, because if anyone disturbed him on the way and caused the casting of the art to fail, then not only would his eldest senior brother not be able to wake up, there was a high possibility that he would never wake up again. His consciousness would disappear, and he would truly turn into a headless stone statue. At the same time, Hu Zi, who was protecting his eldest senior brother's consciousness, would also fall into a deep sleep due to the disappearance of his eldest senior brother's consciousness. If he was a person without a soul, then even if his physical body was fine, he would lose his soul. Second senior brother was also the one leading the casting of the art. He would use his body to cast his divine ability and activate the heavenly phantom art to wake up eldest senior brother. But if he was disturbed and failed, then the heavenly phantom would turn on him, and it would become one of the heavenly phantoms without his own consciousness. He would also be known as a broken soul in the world, and he would be doomed for all eternity. Hu Zi knew the consequences of being disturbed, but he did not care about it for his eldest senior brother. Besides, he believed that his youngest junior brother Su Ming would not allow anyone to disturb him no matter what, unless his youngest junior brother died. However, if there was truly a danger that could kill his youngest junior brother, then even if they did not cast the art, they would still die. Second senior brother also knew the consequences. If it was not someone from the ninth summit, he would not have taken a risk, but if it was his eldest senior brother, then no matter how great of a price he had to pay, he would still make the same choice. They had placed their lives in Su Ming's hands. To him, his eldest senior brother, second senior brother, and Hu Zi were incredibly precious existences in his life. He would not allow anyone to disturb them. Moonlight scattered on the ground. Su Ming sat at the top of the mountain and looked at his second senior brother, who had his eyes closed as he meditated and had his soul spread out to fuse with the world. He looked at the sleeping Hu Zi and the headless statue of his eldest senior brother. He still remembered the words his second senior brother had said before he cast the art. This casting of the art will take 3 months if it's quick, and half a year if it's slow. But with the shaman origin blood that youngest junior brother brought, as long as the process goes smoothly, then I am nearly 100% confident that I could wake eldest senior brother up. Su Ming spread out his Atman and surrounded the entire ninth summit. He sensed the many runes and seals he had placed around the ninth summit during the past 2 days. There were also the runes that Hu Zi had personally placed when he was truly casting the art. It could be said that the entire circular area of 10,000 lis around the ninth summit was filled with runes and seals. This was the first layer of defense around the perimeter. There was also a seal on the wall at the top of the mountain. Su Ming had placed it there. He sat down cross-legged on a mountain rock and sucked in a deep breath. He stood guard quietly and waited for his eldest senior brother to wake up once time passed. He looked forward to when his eldest brother woke up, and the 4 of them would be happy together. They would go to the Western Alliance, to the northern provinces, and accompany him to see if Dark Mountain really existed in the Western Alliance. If Leichen really existed. Together, they would go to the immortal world to search for their master and bathe the immortal world in blood. As he thought about it, a happy smile appeared on Su Ming's face, just like a child. This smile was rarely seen on him, and it was only when he was in the ninth summit that his smile could be so clear. There was no scheming, no scheming. There was only the warmth of family. The 9 peaks were like their home. Su Ming looked at his second senior brother, eldest senior brother, and Hu Zi. As he smiled, determination appeared in his eyes. No matter who it was, no matter what force of power, unless they stepped over his dead body, he would absolutely not allow anyone to interrupt him while he was casting his art. Days passed by. The top of the ninth summit was filled with runes. Even Yu Xian and the others could only stay outside. If they showed any signs of trespassing, then Su Ming would punish them harshly. No one was allowed to take even half a step into the mountain. An oppressive atmosphere gradually surrounded the ninth summit, but within that oppressive atmosphere was a large amount of understanding. All the people on the ninth summit obeyed the promise Su Ming had made and were not allowed to step onto the mountain. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. When the morning of the 8th day arrived, there was a small tribe in a part of eastern wastelands. The tribe was not big and only had a few hundred people. In the past, smoke would rise from the chimneys of this small tribe in the mornings, and the children would play happily. The men of the Berserker tribe would hunt, and the women would take care of the elderly. They lived happily in the peace where the immortals did not exist. Yet on this day, there was no smoke from the chimneys of the tribe in the morning, neither were there any cheerful sounds of play. There was only shrill and weak screams of pain. Those screams of pain were enough to make all those who heard them feel their hearts tremble. They were the shocking screams of women in despair. At that moment, dried-up blood could be seen everywhere in the tribe. Corpses of the elderly, men, women, and children were scattered all over the tribe. From the dried-up blood, it could be seen that they had been dead for more than a few hours. Their expressions were filled with despair and confusion, and they had died horribly. There was no sign of resistance. It was a one-sided massacre. In fact, there was even a child of 4 or 5 years old who was pinned to a tree. That frail body had long since turned cold, but the pained expression on his pale face was a testament to the pain he had gone through as he died. There were 5 aloof men standing outside a tent in the tribe. They were all dressed in black, and their clothes were filled with starlight. They turned a blind eye to the hundreds of corpses in the tribe. The woman's shrill screams of pain came from within the tent. These screams came from different women for an entire night. When morning passed, the clear sky seemed to be unwilling to see the wretched sight on the ground. Dark clouds gradually rose, and rain started falling. As the rain poured down, the flaps of the tents were lifted. A young man tidied up his robes as he walked out. There were also stars on his robes, and they were rotating slowly, causing him to look as if he had been separated from the world. This person was the young master the immortals had spoken of, Dao Yuan, who had an incredibly noble status in Morning Dao sect. He held a fan in his hand, and with an arrogant look on his face, he pulled down the flaps of the tent. The people outside should not be able to see what was inside, but when the wind blew through the rain, it lifted the flaps and revealed the wretched sight within. There were more than 10 corpses of women, and all of them were naked. Their eyes were wide open, and the despair and aura of death within them was enough to make a person's heart and soul shatter. The berserkers are boring. They don't even have a single decent, powerful warrior, and the women are incredibly vulgar. There's no one who can catch my eye. I've barely managed to survive these past few days. It's really boring. As the young man with the fan shook his head, a regretful look appeared on his face, and he walked out of the tribe. He had been in the land of berserkers for several days, and he had rushed through the alliance of the western region, northern province, and other places. His guards had killed more than 100 tribes, and there were plenty of women who had been humiliated and killed, but he had not run into anyone or anything that interested him. But they say that this is Death region. I, Dao Yuan, have played with so many women in Death region. Once I return to the sect, I'll definitely show off. The young man stepped on blood and corpses. The 5 men in black behind him were all expressionless, as if they would not be affected even if the sky fell and the earth cracked before them. There's also a thick, indistinct, murderous aura coming from their bodies. These were 5 callous, merciless, and murderous people. Shocking waves of power were sealed within their bodies, so much so that no one could tell their level of cultivation. However, if they could be summoned by Dao Yuan to accompany him into Death Vortex, then they were clearly not weaklings. It's about time. Let's go to South Morning and take a look. Dao Slave 19, how was the soul search? The young man asked flatly once he walked out of the dead tribe. Young master, we didn't manage to find the berserkers god of berserkers, and divine sense is restricted in this place. But if the berserkers truly have a god of berserkers, then he must be in South Morning, one of the 5 men in black said in a low voice. Then let's go to South Morning and leave. There's no point in staying here. The young man closed his fan and stepped into the air. The 5 Dao slaves followed behind him and charged towards South Morning. As they charged through the sky, the young man yawned and would occasionally look at the ground. His face was filled with derision. To him, all the people here were uncivilized. They wore beast skins and sackcloth. Even if they were slightly better off, they were still far inferior to those from Morning Dao sect. Primitive, but not barbaric. It's incredibly boring. The young man averted his gaze in disdain. The 5 people behind him did not say a single word. They just followed behind him quietly. To them, it was not important whether this place was primitive or not. Their mission was to protect their young master and kill all the people their young master wanted to kill. To them, the land of berserkers was so weak that it could not even withstand a single blow. Even if there were some berserkers who were slightly stronger, They were at most between the first and second step. They could crush them as easily as crushing ants. The only places they needed to pay attention to were Eastern Wasteland's Tower and Great U Palace, which was the place where the immortals descended. The five of them automatically avoided these places and did not tell the young man about them. Before long, when a young man lost most of his interest and no longer looked at the ground, they left Eastern Wastelands and appeared above the Dead Sea. Young master, the land of South Morning has shattered and turned into an innumerable amount of islands. Many of these islands are inhabited by berserkers. There are 3 largest islands among them, and they should have the most people. One of the 5 men in black held a feng shui compass in his hands, and on that feng shui compass was a map of the entire land of berserkers. Let's go straight to the 3 largest islands. The young man yawned and waved his right hand. Immediately, a pitch-black longship about 30 feet long appeared in front of him. He stepped onto it, and the 5 people behind him followed. The longship shot forward with a whooshing sound. It traveled so quickly that in the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. Before long, the bored young man on the longship brought out his fan and swept his gaze across the land. With it, he suddenly widened his eyes. "Stop!" He immediately spoke, and the longship instantly stopped in midair. In the direction of the young man's gaze, there was an island on the Dead Sea. That was Southern Swamp Island, where Fong Tsanglan was. The climax is coming. I've been preparing for it for a long time. The recommendation votes are getting fewer and fewer. Please give me confidence. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 817. These 2 ladies aren't bad. A malicious glare appeared in Dao Yuan's eyes. With one move, he walked out of the longship and looked at Southern Swamp Island in the Dead Sea. At that moment, Fong Tsanglan was standing at the top of the mountain and looking at the world in the distance. She was looking at the island where Freezing Sky Clan was located. Wan Xiu was standing behind her. These 2 women might not be as beautiful as Yuxian, but they were still incredibly beautiful. There was also an ancient air about them, causing them to look like orchids in spring and chrysanthemums in autumn. When he saw them, Dao Yuan instinctively licked his lips and smiled. Not bad, not bad. I didn't expect that there would be 2 pretty ladies in this primitive place. They can compare to my concubines. Dao Yuan opened a fan in his hand and pointed at the island beneath him. Dao Yuan licked his lips and immediately said, "Dao Slave 19, the 5 of you, go down and destroy this island. Don't harm those 2 ladies. Also, see whether there are any other people as beautiful as them." The 5 men in black behind him wrapped their fists in their palms towards the young man without any expression on their faces. Understood. Once the 5 of them spoke, they immediately took a step forward. Just as they were about to descend on Southern Swamp Island, which was completely unaware of the dangers around it, the entire sky suddenly trembled. The tremors caused the weather to change, and it looked as if black fog had appeared in the sky. As it tumbled about, a chilling presence that could freeze hearts spread out in waves from all directions. The expressions of the 5 men in black who were about to descend on Southern Swamp Island changed. They stopped moving and swiftly returned to the young man's side. The young man was also momentarily stunned. He averted his gaze from Southern Swamp Island and looked around him. The sky around him was filled with waves of chilling air. It was not centered around this place, but was gathering toward a spot in the distance. The rolling, chilling fog could not be seen clearly with the naked eye, but if anyone scanned the area with their divine sense, they would immediately find that it was not fog at all. It was clear that they were fragmented souls with distorted bodies. The fragmented souls were of both humans and beasts. Their bodies were illusory, and their expressions were dazed. However, they were charging forward with ferocious expressions. It was also their howls that caused the chilling air to rise. Heavenly phantom art. Young master, someone is casting an art to stir up all the fragmented souls in this place and gather them together. One of the men in black behind the young man immediately said in a low voice. A glint appeared in Dao Yuan's eyes. He looked at southern swamp island beneath him, then at the momentum of the moving, fragmented souls in the distance. Gradually, excitement appeared in his eyes. Remember the location of this place. Let's go and see who activated the heavenly phantom art. That person must not be an ordinary berserker to be able to execute this art. He might even be that so-called god of berserkers. I want to torture and kill his people in front of him. He is definitely. I'll do many things outside, but this is his people. I have his. Dead. You. Away you. You. Away. The young man laughed and returned to the longboat. After the 5 men in black followed him, the longboat turned into a ray of light and disappeared. It followed the cold soul in the sky and charged forward. The black longship traveled at an incredible speed, and before long, it overtook the numerous islands in the Dead Sea and charged towards the 3 great islands of South Morning. A glint suddenly appeared in the eyes of the Tao slave, holding the feng shui compass behind him. On the feng shui compass in his hands, the 3 great islands of South Morning lit up swiftly. Young master, there are a few strong cultivators here. One of them is on Witch God Island, and his cultivation base is the strongest. He has already entered the 2nd step, but his cultivation base is not pure. There was another person on Freezing Sky Island. That person had an uncertain level of cultivation. The remnant souls in the area were also gathering towards him. He should be the one who had cast the heavenly phantom art. However, there were 2 other people beside him. One of them has a very strange aura, and it seems to be similar to the tiger talisman sacred formation outside. The last one should be in a deep slumber due to severe injuries, and his consciousness is very weak. I believe that the person who used the heavenly ghost technique wants to use the heavenly ghost technique to save the person who was awakened. The feng shui compass was clearly not an ordinary item, and the Tao slave's knowledge was definitely extraordinary as well, or else it would have been impossible for him to be able to see so many things. However, he did not notice that there was no light that belonged to Su Ming on his feng shui compass. With a cold sneer, the young man on the longship controlled the longship and turned it into a long arc that charged towards Freezing Sky Island, where Su Ming was. He was so quick that he soon arrived outside Freezing Sky Island as the fragmented souls that filled the sky gathered together. As a shocking bang reverberated in the air, the longship did not stop. It crashed straight into Freezing Sky Island's defensive ruin. The screen of light immediately distorted, and it only lasted for the span of 1 breath before it shattered with a bang. It turned into an endless amount of shards that fell to the ground. The longship shot through it and charged straight into Freezing Sky Island. The instant it did so, the longship did not stop. With a whoosh, it charged straight towards the spot where the remnant souls were gathering in the sky, the 9th summit. Almost at the same time the longship broke through the screen of light around Freezing Sky Island, Su Ming, who was sitting at the top of the 9th summit, opened his eyes. A brilliant light shone brilliantly in his eyes, and it immediately turned into a murderous aura that surged into the sky. The strength of that murderous aura surpassed that of when Su Ming fought against Di Tian in the land where the immortals descended. He stared straight ahead and spread out his Atman to see the ship that had turned into a long black arc and was charging towards him from the distance. And the 6 people on the ship. At the same time, the other people on the 9th summit also noticed the murderous aura spreading out from Su Ming's body, along with the booming sounds of Freezing Sky Island's rune shattering. Bai Su's expression changed. Yu Xian, who had been frowning and thinking about something by her side, lifted her head swiftly. The mud had been lying on the ground lazily, but at that instant, it stood up and stared into the distance. There was no longer a hint of laziness on its face, only a grave look that had never appeared on its face before. Almost at the instant Su Ming's gaze landed on the ship, the constellation robe on Dao Yuan's body shone with starlight. The countless stars moving about seemed normal, but when they landed in Su Ming's eyes, he felt as if his entire mind and Atman were about to be rapidly sucked away. Without any hesitation, He lifted his right hand and pushed down a mountain rock beneath him. With it, the originally empty sea within a circular area of 10,000 lis of the ninth summit instantly let out a violent bang. As that sound rang out, the area within 10,000 lis immediately distorted and turned into an illusion, making it difficult for anyone to see what was within. Dao Yuan's laughter reverberated in the air at that moment, and there was a haughty air to it. Ignorant wild berserker, the Taoist robe on my body is a priceless treasure that only the direct descendants of mourning Tao sect can possess. If any divine sense tries to harm me, then they will suffer a backlash from the ruin on my Taoist robe. Wild berserker, your divine sense is heavily injured right now. I don't even need to attack you, and you're already close to death. Tao slave, break this rune. I saw just now that they are indeed using the heavenly phantom art to heal themselves. Haha, the thing I love the most is making others suffer. Dao Yuan laughed smugly and fanned himself with the fan in his hand. The smug and arrogant look on his face made him incredibly excited. As he spoke, 4 of the 5 Dao slaves behind him immediately walked out. With aloof expressions on their faces, they closed in on the distortions within a circular area of 10,000 lis of the ninth summit. They lifted their right hands at the same time and pushed down together. The distortions within the rune trembled with a bang, and the sounds of them trembling shook the sky and earth. As they rumbled, the rune within 10,000 lis started showing signs of crumbling. You do have some tricks up your sleeves. A rune that can withstand an attack from 4 of my Dao slaves is rare. Attack at full power. A glint appeared in Dao Yuan's eyes, and he became even more excited. He pointed at the rune with the fan in his right hand. As the rune rumbled, Su Ming's face turned slightly pale as he stood on the ninth summit. The suction force coming from the person's robe just now was incredibly strong. If Su Ming had not immediately averted his gaze and used all his strength to activate the rune to block it, the backlash would have been even stronger. Mourning Dao sect. Su Ming stood up with a dark expression on his face. He cast a glance at his second senior brother, who was casting the art of a soul remnant and was continuously spreading out from his body. He also cast a glance at Hu Zi, who had a smile on his lips even though he was asleep. That smile was filled with joy. Resolve appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He swung his arm and immediately swept up his eldest senior brother and the others before sending them into his master's cave abode. Then, he walked out of the rune at the top of the mountain. At the instant he did so, a loud bang that surged into the sky reverberated in the air. The protection of 10,000 lis crumbled at that moment, and its area shrank to only 5,000 lis. The sounds of it crumbling continued. Before long, the protection of the rune would completely shatter. It was not that the rune was not strong enough to cause the rune to crumble to such an extent in such a short amount of time, but the enemy who had invaded them was simply too strong. Almost at the same time, Su Ming walked down from the mountain. The hundreds of berserkers rushed over from all directions. Their faces were pale, but there was determination on their faces. That's Mourning Dao sect's battleship. They're wearing constellation robes. That robe has a powerful defense. That person who calls himself Young Master should be a direct descendant of Mourning Dao sect. As for the people who are breaking the rune, they're Dao slaves and their levels of cultivation. Yu Xian's expression changed. Once she saw Su Ming, she immediately told him what she knew. They're lords of world planes in the 3rd step, and they have the constellation robes. Their levels of cultivation might be suppressed, but it's not that great. The one who said these words was the mutt. Its voice was ancient, and as it spoke, powerful ripples of power spread out from its body. Young Master, I can only protect you and that boy Su as they leave safely. As for the others, it's difficult for me to do, so, while the berserkers are restricting them, the mutt said in a low voice while staring at the distorting rune that was tumbling backwards in the distance. Yu Xian was momentarily stunned. With a pale face, she looked towards Su Ming. Yu Xian leave? Su Ming said flatly. He would not leave. This was the 9th summit. This was his home. His senior brothers were here, and he could only die in battle to be buried with them. He would absolutely not leave alone. Strongly request for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:18. Yuxian's face was pale. She bit her bottom lip, and hesitation appeared on her face. Su Ming's expression was calm. Determination and a will to die appeared in his eyes. In his eyes, this was a battle where he had absolutely no chance of winning. 5 lords of world planes who had not been suppressed too much in the land of berserkers and could still bring out the power of the third step were simply too difficult to fight against. Even one of them could kill all manner of lives, as if they were ants. Su Ming might not have truly fought against a cultivator in the third step before, but the memory of the killing sword's might was still fresh in his mind. That was definitely not a power he could fight against. But what could he do? He could not choose to give up on a 9th summit, abandon his senior brothers who were casting their arts, and leave on his own. Since he could not do this, then there was only one path before him. If he could not live with them, then he would die with them. Su Ming turned his head around and cast a glance at his master's cave abode. There was a reluctance to part on his face, but there was also determination. At that moment, the booming sounds in the area were getting closer. The rune of thousands of lis was continuously tumbling backwards, and in the blink of an eye, it was reduced to only 1,000 lis. The 4 Dao slaves in the third step were using their powerful levels of cultivation to compress and shatter the rune like a hot knife through butter. Su Ming lifted his right hand quietly and swung at the sky. Immediately, a large amount of purple fog surrounded his body and turned into the Undertaker of Evil's armor. Once he lifted his right hand and seized the air, the purple fog instantly came to him and turned into the Undertaker of Evil's spear in his hand. He held the cold Undertaker of Evil's spear tightly, and a murderous aura appeared in his eyes. He stood there like a mountain, and even if there was a violent storm, it would have to crush him first, or else no one would be able to take even half a step forward. I'm indebted to the 9th summit for giving me peace for many years, and it was you who saved me from death in the past. Today, I will live and die with the 9th summit. An old man walked out slowly from the hundreds of people in the area. He looked at Su Ming, and as he spoke, determination appeared on his face. That's right, the 9th summit has given us peace for many years. Now that we are in danger, there is no harm in dying. More people walked out slowly. Their eyes were bloodshot. They might be afraid of their enemy's level of cultivation, but there were times when they had to do certain things no matter how afraid they were. The 9 summits are like our home. Fighting to the death for the 9 summits is also the best home for us disciples of Freezing Sky Clan. Our cultivation bases are low, but we are hot-blooded. Even if we die, we will spill our blood on the 9 peaks. Even if we die, we will bury our souls here. Even more voices erupted from the hundreds of people with low voices filled with determination. Not a single one of them chose to retreat. The hundreds of people who had stayed in the 9th summit over the years had madness on their faces, and it was a form of fearlessness towards death. It was a determination that said that even if they died, they would die in the 9th summit. Bai Su did not speak, but her expression and the fact that she did not move back represented all of her thoughts. She looked at Su Ming, and her face was filled with gentleness. She suddenly felt that she did not have too many regrets in this. If she could die in battle with Su Ming, then it would also be the end for her. Chen trembled. By his side, the bald crane had an anguished look on its face. It wanted to run away. With its personality, it had done this many times, but this time, it could not take that step. It looked at Qian Shun, at Su Ming, at the cave abode at the top of the 9th summit, and for the first time, madness appeared on its face. Darn it all, I'm a man this time. I'll fight them to the death. Young master, if you don't leave now, then it'll be difficult for me to protect you when those 5 people surround you, the colorless mutt said in a low voice with a grave expression on its face. I'm not leaving either. Yuxian gritted her teeth. She told herself in her heart that Su Ming was someone she fancied, and he could be sold for a good price. If she left this time and he died, then everything would be for naught. This would definitely be the worst deal she could make. Yu Xian would definitely not do this sort of deal. Once Yu Xian made her decision, she immediately asked, Xiao Huang, how many of those 5 can you handle? I don't have their constellation robes, and my level of cultivation is suppressed in the land of berserkers. With some difficulty, I can hold back 3 of them for an hour. The mutt answered languidly. If I cast a secret art, I can hold back 1 of them. Yu Xian gritted her teeth and spoke to Su Ming. In her heart, she was feeling anxious. Why weren't those 2 old coots here yet? How much time had passed? Could they have run into some accident on the way? Su Ming fell silent. At that moment, the booming sounds around him were getting closer. The rune had already shrunk to an area of several hundreds of lis, and in the midst of those booming sounds, Dao Yuan's arrogant laughter could also be heard. An hour. Su Ming closed his eyes, but soon reopened them. He wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards Yu Xian and the mutt. I will remember your kindness. The mutt swiftly leaped into the air, and an earthen yellow light erupted from its body. In an instant, that light stretched 100,000 feet. A roar that shook the sky and earth reverberated in the air. Its body transformed from the mutt into a yellow dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long. The yellow dragon had a ferocious expression on its face. As it roared, it charged towards the rune that was continuously being compressed beyond the 9th summit. At the same time, Yu Xian brought out a crimson medicinal core with a pale face. Once she placed it in her mouth, she turned around and stepped into the rune. With the yellow dragon, she charged towards the 4 Dao slaves who were breaking down the rune. When Su Ming saw Yu Xian and the yellow dragon leaving, the determination to die appeared on his face. With a single move, the presence of life cultivation erupted from his body with a bang. An endless amount of wind and snow surrounded his body, and when he got up, he turned into a long arc that charged out of the 9th summit and closed in on the rune. The other hundreds of people had solemn expressions on their faces as they watched the shocking battle that was about to happen. This battle would decide the fate of the 9th summit. The yellow dragon was the first to rush out. At the instant its body flew out of the rune, a glint appeared in the eyes of the 4 Dao slaves who were casting their divine abilities towards the rune. World-traversing Abyss Dragon, the Emperor of Abyss True World. The yellow dragon lifted its head and roared at the sky. Immediately, the yellow light around its body spread out in all directions and enveloped 3 of the 4 people. The 3 of them seemed to be dragged along by the yellow light. As the yellow dragon roared and charged into the sky, the 3 of them were dragged along by the yellow light and flew up as well. Damn it, this is indeed an evil place. This is a place that goes against Morning Dao sect, or else how could there be a world-traversing Abyss Dragon from the Emperor of Abyss True World? Kill this dragon. Skin it. Kill it. I'll bring it back to the sect and hang it on the door. Dao Yuan immediately shouted. There was not a hint of panic on his face. Instead, he was incredibly excited. As his voice traveled outwards, a freezing glare shone in the eyes of the 4th Dao slave outside the rune. He flew out swiftly, but just as he was about to rush into the sky to fight against the yellow dragon, a delicate cry came from within the distorted rune. Right before everyone's eyes, Yu Xian turned into a long arc and flew out of the rune like an immortal. No one knew what sort of effects the medicinal core she had swallowed previously had, but at that moment, a thick wave of abyss death aura instantly spread out from her body. As that aura surrounded her, her face turned even paler, making her look like a corpse. As she flew out, the abyss death aura immediately spread out and blocked off the 4th Dao slave. Almost at the instant Yu Xian flew out, Dao Yuan's eyes went wide. As his body shuddered, he let out a scream that was almost hoarse. There's such a beauty in the world. Dao Slave 51, capture her alive. You must capture her alive. Do not harm even a single hair on her head. Capture her alive for me, and I'll make you my vice commander. Dao Slave 19, go and help 51. You must capture this woman alive. Dao Yuan was incredibly excited. A wicked and lustful glare appeared in his eyes, as if he wanted to pierce through Yu Xian's robes. He felt that his trip to the land of berserkers this time was incredibly worth it. At this moment, the expressionless black-clothed man, who was the only guard beside him, moved and turned into a long arc that charged towards Yu Xian. Yet at the instant he moved less than 1,000 feet away, a whirlwind formed by ice and snow charged out of the distorted ruin. Naturally, Su Ming was within that whirlwind of ice and snow. Su Ming took a step forward and closed in on Dao Slave 19 in an instant. He did not rush straight towards Dao Slave 19, but instead charged towards Dao Yuan. He was so quick that he turned into an afterimage. With the Undertaker of Evil's spear in hand and the wind and snow around him, Su Ming's speed reached his limit. A glint appeared in Dao Slave 19's eyes, and he gave up on moving towards Yu Xian. Instead, he turned around, and, at the same time he looked towards Su Ming, he lifted his right hand and pushed forward with one finger. Dao Yuan did not even bother dodging. As a cold sneer appeared on his face, he looked at Su Ming with an arrogant expression. He was confident that before this person could even get close to him, he would immediately be killed by his Dao slaves. Yet at the instant Dao Slave 19 pointed towards Su Ming turned the back of his left hand downwards and his palm towards the sky as he executed Destiny's divine ability. This battle was incredibly crucial, and he could not afford to make even the slightest mistake. He had to attack, and he had to use his strongest attack. Between the past and the future is destiny. Su Ming swung his left hand in the direction of Dao Slave 19, who was pointing towards him. At the instant he did so, the time in the entire world seemed to have changed, and Dao Slave 19's finger froze in midair for a moment. As the black-robed man's expression changed, the presence of a Lord of World planes immediately spread out from his body. A destructive power also erupted from his body and broke through Su Ming's circulation of destiny, but his fingers still froze in midair for an instant. That instant was a chance for Su Ming. At the instant Dao Slave 19's finger froze and Su Ming executed Destiny's divine ability, his body surpassed the speed of lightning and swiftly appeared in front of Dao Yuan. Dao Yuan was stunned, and before he could react to what was happening, the Undertaker of Evil's spear in Su Ming's hand swept up the flying snow that contained the power of Su Ming's life matrix. In fact, the snow turned a faint shade of red, and it looked like the light of autumn. Su Ming thrust the spear straight towards Dao Yuan's forehead. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 819. This was a spear strike filled with conviction. This was the strongest spear strike Su Ming could bring forth at that moment. The tip of the spear had already turned into ice. It was the power of midwinter that had fused with Su Ming's life matrix. It was the power of midwinter. The spear sliced through the air and stirred up a piercing sound. At the instant it was thrust forward, the killing sword manifested before Su Ming and charged towards Dao Yuan with a bloodthirsty whistle behind the long spear. At that moment, even Dao Slave 19 did not have time to stop or save Dao Yuan. His eyes immediately turned bloodshot, and he took a swift step forward. His body distorted, and when he reappeared, he was already behind Su Ming, but he was still too late. Almost at the instant Dao Slave 19 closed in, Su Ming's long spear stabbed the center of the stunned Dao Yuan's brows. At the instant the long spear touched the center of Dao Yuan's brows, the rotating constellation robe on his body immediately erupted with an endless starry sky. That starlight was piercing to the eyes, and it also gave off a piercing feeling. All those who were touched by it would feel as if 10,000 swords had pierced through their bodies. At the instant a shocking boom reverberated in the world, a huge rebound came from the Undertaker of Evil's spear in Su Ming's hand. That rebound traveled into Su Ming's body, causing him to cough up a mouthful of blood. As for Dao Yuan, his face turned stark pale, and he staggered a few steps backwards. Starlight surrounded his body, but he was completely unscathed. His body might be unharmed, but he still felt a lingering fear in his heart. During that instant just now, he had clearly felt death descend upon him, especially when he saw Su Ming's eyes at that time. The madness in his eyes made the heart of Dao Yuan, who had always acted like a tyrant, used his status to intimidate others, and did as he pleased, tremble. My constellation robe is not something you can break. Damn it, you! Dao Yuan screamed shrilly, but before he could finish speaking, a piercing screech reached him. It was the killing sword that came after Su Ming's Undertaker of Evil Spear. That killing sword was the immortal's supreme treasure. Su Ming might have injured its sword spirit when he refined it, causing the sword's might to be unable to reach the level of killing those below the third step. But it was still a killing sword, and its might could not be underestimated. At that moment, it closed in on Dao Yuan in an instant, and, as he screamed, the killing sword stabbed the center of Dao Yuan's brows, in the same spot where the long spear had stabbed. Another loud bang reverberated in the air at that instant. When the killing sword touched the center of Dao Yuan's brows, it was also affected by the constellation robe on his body. It caused the killing sword to let out an unwilling sword hum and be sent flying back by the rebound. Dao Yuan took a few steps back once again, and blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. The center of his brows might have been completely unharmed, but the tremors caused by Su Ming's spear and sword had injured Dao Yuan's internal organs, even though his level of cultivation was much lower than his guards. When the sword pierced through Dao Yuan's body, Dao Slave 19 had already appeared behind Su Ming with killing intent. His palm was filled with the power of essence belonging to those in the third step, and he swiftly pressed his palm down on Su Ming. At the instant his palm landed, Su Ming did not even have the time to turn around. However, from the moment he had been unable to injure Dao Yuan with his first spear strike, he already knew what would happen. He was prepared, and almost at the instant his palm closed in, a nine-colored light erupted from Su Ming's body. That nine-colored light was naturally the five-direction seal. The five-direction seal's protection crashed into Dao Slave 19's palm at the instant it erupted forth. A loud bang shook the sky and reverberated in the air. Su Ming coughed up a huge mouthful of blood, and his body tumbled to the side like a kite with its string snapped. Five-direction seal. It's a pity that you still don't know how to truly use this treasure. Killing intent appeared in Dao Slave 19's eyes. He took a step forward at an even faster speed and charged towards Su Ming. He was confident that with one more palm strike, even if Su Ming had the five-direction seal, he would still die. Kill him. Kill him. How dare he injure me? You must kill him. Destroy his entire family. Destroy his entire race. Destroy the entire land of berserkers. Dao Yuan screamed madly in a piercing voice not too far away. He touched the corner of his mouth, and the blood on it made his heart pound in fear. His injuries were not serious, but that blood had made fear rise in his heart once again. The lingering fear in his heart caused his body to tremble. As a person with the family name Dao in Morning Dao sect, he had a large number of guards trained by his family to protect him since he was young. It could be said that he had practically never been injured since he was young, much less of blood trickling out of the corners of his mouth. However, Su Ming's actions just now and the blood in his mouth were the first time Dao Yuan had encountered such a thing in the land of berserkers over the years. In the midst of his fear, the thought of summoning the army of the sects in the world outside to charge into the land of berserkers rose in his heart. As his piercing roars reverberated in the air and Dao Slave 19 charged towards Su Ming, a resolute look appeared on Su Ming's face as he laughed brokenly. He gritted his teeth and threw the Undertaker of Evil's spear in his hand. He did not throw it towards Dao Slave 19, who was chasing after him from behind. Instead, he threw the spear towards Dao Yuan, who was screaming and wiping off the blood at the corners of his mouth. His face had turned pale from fear. Su Ming hated Dao Yuan to the core. If he could kill this person before he died, then even if he died, Su Ming believed that he would have to make Dao Yuan pay the price. Besides, There was no way Su Ming could fight against Dao, Slave 19, who was chasing after him. His body was already heavily injured, and the five-direction seal had started showing signs of not being able to fight back against that palm strike. Clearly, that five-direction seal had belonged to Dao Chun in the past, and this person was also from Morning Dao sect. There was definitely a connection between them. That was why the best way to save himself at that moment was not to fight against that Dao slave, but to force Dao Yuan to his death. With that one throw, the Undertaker of Evil's spear turned into a long arc, and with a piercing screech and a large amount of purple smoke, it closed in on Dao Yuan. Damn it! Hurry up and save me. Fear immediately appeared on Dao Yuan's face. He believed that with the constellation robe, he would not be killed, but the rebound just then had still made him feel incredibly uncomfortable. Fear had lingered in his heart to begin with, and when he saw the long spear charging towards him, he instinctively screamed. As Dao Yuan screamed, Su Ming gathered the power of destiny in his left hand and swung it at the Dao slave. The art to change the flow of time appeared once again, and it caused the Dao slave's body to freeze. Dao slave 19's expression was gloomy. As far as he was concerned, this person before him clearly possessed a low cultivation, yet Chun Shi's schemes were extremely meticulous. Coupled with Chun Shi's strange technique in using Dao Yuan as a hostage, Chun Shi had actually caused him to lose the initiative and be restrained at every turn. This sort of schemes, this sort of methods, and this sort of divine ability were things that Dao Slave 19 had never seen before in his life of slaughter. Killing intent shone in his eyes, and he thought to himself that he had to kill this person as soon as possible, or else once this person escaped this disaster and grew up, he would definitely become a huge problem based on his schemes. At the instant his body froze, he suddenly let out a loud shout that shook the sky. As it reverberated in the air, Su Ming coughed up blood. Booming sounds rang in his ears, and the injuries in his body became even more severe because of the tremors. Dao Slave 19 might have stopped for an instant, but at the same time he shouted, cracking sounds reverberated in the world before Dao Yuan. Huge cracks immediately appeared in the air, and by the looks of it, they seemed to want to devour the incoming Undertaker of Evil's spear. Resolve appeared on Su Ming's face. His heart might be aching with pain, but at that moment, he let out a low roar without any hesitation. Undertaker of Evil's spear, explode. At the instant Su Ming's voice traveled outwards, the Undertaker of Evil's spear let out a mournful screech. It had been with Su Ming for a long, long time, and at that moment, that mournful screech was a sign of its reluctance to part with him. However, it did not stop for even a single moment. At the instant it closed in on the dimensional cracks, the Undertaker of Evil's spear exploded with a bang. This spear was created by the first god of Berserkers. With the first god of Berserkers' level of cultivation, the might of the enchanted treasures he created would definitely be extraordinary. If it was not for the fact that Su Ming's level of cultivation was not high enough, he would have been able to bring out even more of its power. As the Undertaker of Evil's spear exploded, a destructive power erupted with a bang and spread out in all directions. Dao Yuan was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. The shadow of death rose in his heart. It was much stronger than before, causing his face to instantly turn stark pale and his pupils to shrink. Dao Slave 19's expression also changed drastically in an unprecedented manner. He was already very close to Su Ming at that moment, and with just a lift of his hand, he could execute the art to kill him. But he did not have the time to do so. He could not be bothered with killing Su Ming. His hate for Su Ming's scheme and for using Dao Yuan to threaten him burned deep into his bones, but he could do nothing about it. If he continued chasing after Su Ming, then Dao Yuan would definitely be in danger. With gritted teeth, Dao Slave 19 turned around and charged towards Dao Yuan. A loud bang shook the sky and earth, and even Yu Xian and the yellow dragon were shaken by it. During that instant, it swept up the 9 heavens and turned into ripples that spread madly through the area. when Su Ming sent out the final wisp of his will to make the Undertaker of Evil's spear self-destruct. The power of the explosion was mainly limited to a very small area, which was why the ripples in the area only made the sound of the explosion loud. But in truth, it was not very strong. In the midst of the booming sounds, Su Ming fell back. His actions just now might have seemed dangerous, but every single step he took was within his calculations. As he retreated, he coughed up blood once again. As his face turned pale, he knew that his injuries were incredibly grave, but he had to fight because behind him was the ninth summit, and his 3 senior brothers were there. At the instant he moved back, Su Ming lifted his right hand, and a welcoming of deities appeared on his palm. Without any hesitation, he swallowed it. At the same time, Su Ming swallowed the welcoming of deities, and the booming sounds disappeared. Dao Slave 19 used his body to shield Dao Yuan from the spot where the Undertaker of Evil's spear had self-destructed. With a pale face, he coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his face instantly became much older. Cracks also appeared on the constellation robe on his body at that moment before it turned into shards and disappeared. Based on how old he looked, it could be seen that he had paid an incredibly great price to fend off the Undertaker of Evil's spear's self-destruction, but he was still heavily injured. Dao Yuan's face was also pale. Blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth once again. The constellation robe on his body was circulating rapidly, and when blood flowed out of it, he let out a piercing roar. "He hurt me. Kill him. Kill him." Starting from midnight, the monthly votes will be doubled. The explosion will happen tomorrow, and the first update will be delivered at midnight. Your monthly votes have already fallen to 8th place, so please save your monthly votes in preparation for the double vote. Don't forget to vote. Everyone, see you at midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Starting Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 820. The 3 Dao slaves fighting against the yellow dragon in the sky were roaring non-stop at that moment, trying to break free of the yellow light's restraints and descend, but the yellow dragon's exhausted roars made the yellow light even stronger. Clearly, the yellow dragon had already brought out all his power. Yu Xian's body was like dead ash. An even thicker abyss death aura spread out from her body and surrounded the area, causing others to be unable to see what was going on inside. However, the continuous booming sounds were enough for them to know just how intense the battle between the Dao slave and Yu Xian was. However, Yu Xian was not a berserker in the 3rd step. The medicinal core she had devoured contained a very strong rebound, and it could be said that she was completely draining her strength to persevere in this battle. She did not know why she was doing this. If this was just a business deal, then she would not have been so persistent. But every single time she wanted to give up and let the yellow dragon take her away, the happy smile on Su Ming's face when he was with his senior brothers would appear in her head. The warmth within that smile made Yu Xian feel very warm, and she could not bear to part with him. Xian, do you know why I gave you this name? The most precious memory in Yu Xian's heart appeared in her mind. It was the only memory that could keep her company during the lonely nights in her cold home. My good daughter, don't be naughty. Once I finish making this leather coat for you, you won't be at a disadvantage when you go out and fight against those children. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to a very far away place. Xian, don't cry. Remember what I told you before. The meaning behind your name is to be strong. Don't be sad. Yu Xian did not know why the most precious memory in her life would appear in her mind during this battle. Perhaps it's that warm feeling that makes me like this place, that makes me unwilling to leave. Tears fell from the corners of Yu Xian's eyes. "Mama," she mumbled. She did not care about the rebound in her body and the gradual numbness in her body as she drained every ounce of her strength to persevere and not let the Dao slave leave the area around the Abyss Death aura. As the booming sounds from the Undertaker of Evil's spear's explosion faded away, Dao Slave 19 and Dao Yuan's figures were revealed beyond the 100 Lease rune of the 9th summit. "Sir, who are you?" For the first time since Dao Slave 19 stepped into the land of berserkers, he did not immediately obey Dao Yuan's orders. Instead, he stared at Su Ming, and as he panted, he spoke languidly. For what he could see, the young man in front of him was so calculative that he was rarely seen in his life. Even in such a disadvantageous situation, the young man was still able to injure him. After all, the young man's cultivation was only at the second step. For him to be able to do this, it was enough to show how powerful the young man was. Mourning Dao sect should have taken in this sort of person instead of fighting to the death, but all of this had become impossible due to Dao Yuan's hobbies and actions. This person must be killed. I can't let him have the chance to grow. If he can reach the second step in the land of berserkers, then there might come a day when he becomes the second Lai Shanxiu. A barely noticeable glint appeared in Dao Slave 19's eyes. As he circulated his cultivation base to heal himself, he wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming. Perhaps this is a misunderstanding. Just as he was about to speak, Dao Yuan roared furiously from the side. Dao Slave 19, shut up. I order you to attack immediately. Kill him. Kill him. Dao Yuan glared at Su Ming in a frenzy. He had only been injured twice in his life. The first time had been caused by Su Ming's spear and sword, and the second time had been caused by Su Ming. This caused his hatred towards Su Ming to reach an indescribable level. Dao Slave 19's expression changed, but he ignored Dao Yuan and smiled at Su Ming. When he wrapped his fist in his palm, he was just about to speak when a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He had already finished fusing with a welcoming of deities. At that moment, without a single word, he took a step forward. He had been able to tell since a long time ago that the Dao Slave was stalling for time. Forget about his injuries. Due to the destruction of his constellation robe, his level of cultivation had definitely been greatly suppressed by the laws in the land of berserkers. This was something Su Ming had expected, which was why the Dao Slave was stalling for time. One of the reasons was to heal his injuries, and the other was to wait for the other 4 Dao Slaves to come to his aid. Su Ming could tell with just one glance that he had not attacked just now and had given the Dao Slave a few breaths of time because he wanted to fuse with the welcoming of deities. Now that he was done fusing with it, there was no way he would give the Dao Slave any more time. Almost at the moment, Su Ming charged towards him without a single word. Dao Slave 19's expression changed. He knew that Su Ming had seen through his actions. With a glint in his eyes, Dao Slave 19 lifted his right hand and seized the air. An endless amount of violent gusts of wind charged towards him, and they immediately turned into a long green whip formed by wind in his hand. With a single move, the long whip in his hand swept horizontally towards Su Ming. At the same time, he formed a seal with his left hand and pointed forward. Immediately, an illusory galaxy manifested before him. That galaxy was 3,000 feet in size, and the starlight shining from it instantly reached a piercing degree. However, it was incredibly clear that he no longer possessed the power of the third step. A great suppressive force descended on his body in an unseen manner. Without the constellation robe blocking it, the Dao Slave revealed that he was only in the middle stage of the second step. Dao Yuan, who was completely unaware of this, was still making a ruckus in a frenzy, but in the blink of an eye, his arrogant voice came to an abrupt halt, and in its place he sucked in a sharp breath and let out a shrill scream. Even the Dao Slave's expression changed drastically at that instant, because once Su Ming took his third step before the Dao Slave, his body swelled up with a bang. As the illusions around him distorted, in the blink of an eye, Su Ming, who had taken his fourth step, turned into a candle dragon that was 10,000 feet tall and had the body of a snake. Its gigantic body, its crimson scales, its presence that was filled with a mighty pressure, and that unique feeling that belonged to the candle dragon was the welcoming of deities. This was Su Ming's transformation after using the welcoming of deities. Candle dragon. A shocking roar tumbled out of the candle dragon's mouth at that instant. Su Ming, who had turned into the candle dragon, could no longer be described as a berserker's level of cultivation. At that moment, his strength was endless, and he also had the complete inborn divine ability of the Candle Dragon. As a booming sound that shattered space reverberated in the air, the Candle Dragon's gigantic tail swept outwards and charged towards the Tao slave with an astonishing momentum. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the Candle Dragon's tail immediately crashed into the wind whip. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, the whip instantly crumbled, and at the same time, the Candle Dragon's tail lashed out at the 3,000 feet starlight. As an even stronger bang spread out, the 3,000 feet starlight completely shattered. The Candle Dragon's tail was also reduced to a bloody mess, but even as it crumbled, it still swept outwards and swept towards the Tao slave and Tao Yuan, who was behind him. Candle Dragon. As the Tao slave's expression changed drastically, he grabbed Tao Yuan, who was behind him, and retreated swiftly. At the same time, shrill howls tumbled out of his mouth. That howl seemed to contain a divine ability, causing the air before him to distort and turn into circles of ripples that looked like the surface of water as he retreated in an attempt to block the Candle Dragon's gigantic tail lashing towards him. Booming sounds shook the sky. As the Candle Dragon's tail swept outwards, it shattered all the illusory ripples on the surface of the water and lashed out at the Tao slave's retreating body. The Tao slave's eyes went wide, and as he coughed up a huge mouthful of blood, he used that huge force to drag Tao Yuan back at an even faster speed. At that moment, his heart was filled with shock. He was already wary of his enemy from the Berserker tribe. This person had an endless amount of divine abilities and enchanted treasures. He was a calculative person, and his calculations were exquisite. He could even turn into the ferocious beast that could destroy worlds, the Candle Dragon. If even the Tao slave was reacting this way, then it was even more so for Tao Yuan. Tao Yuan was already scared out of his wits. With a pale face, he looked at the gigantic creature Su Ming had turned into, and suddenly, regret towards this trip rose in his heart. Su Ming knew that he could not remain as the Candle Dragon for long, and he was also heavily injured. Once he whipped out his tail, his gigantic body lifted its head and opened its mouth wide to suck in a deep breath, intending to use the Candle Dragon's inborn divine ability to devour the Tao slave and Tao Yuan alive. Yet at the instant the Candle Dragon that was Su Ming opened his mouth, a furious roar came from behind him. It came from Tao Slave 21, who was fighting against Yu Xian. Tao Slave 21 moved and charged towards Su Ming. Behind him, Yu Xian coughed up blood. Her face was as pale as a corpse's as she staggered backwards. She had already done her best to restrict Tao Slave 21 for a long time, but this was already her limit. In fact, she had already drained her life, but she still could not restrict him any longer. As she retreated, Yu Xian coughed up blood again. Tears appeared in her eyes, and there was a slightly dazed look on her face. Only she could hear her mother's gentle voice in her ears. "Xian Xian, you have to be strong. I will bless you from a faraway place. I will bless my daughter with happiness for the rest of her life." "Mother," Yu Xian mumbled. If it was not because Tao Slave 19 and Tao Yuan were in danger at that moment, then Tao Slave 21, who had broken out of the Abyss Death Aura, would have definitely captured Yu Xian. However, he was worried about Tao Yuan at that moment and did not bother about Yu Xian. With his fastest speed, he instantly appeared beside the Candle Dragon. When he lifted his right hand, it looked as if it had disappeared and was replaced by a planet that fused with the planet on his robe. Then, he pushed his palm towards the Candle Dragon. Madness appeared in Su Ming's eyes. All of his previous calculations had finally allowed him to obtain this chance, but sometimes there is only a thin line between a plan and a change. At that moment, as he faced the palm coming towards him from behind, Su Ming activated all of the Candle Dragon's power without any hesitation. As he opened his mouth to devour in a frenzy, Tao Yuan and Tao Slave 19's bodies charged towards the Candle Dragon's mouth against their own will. Yet at that moment, Tao Slave 21's palm landed on the head of the Candle Dragon that was Su Ming. As a shocking boom reverberated in the air, Tao Slave Slave 19's body turned into a long arc and was devoured by the candle dragon Su Ming had turned into. However, the candle dragon did not have time to devour Dao Yuan and was torn to shreds by that palm strike. As the candle dragon's body crumbled, the welcoming of deities in Su Ming's body dissipated and was completely destroyed. His body was revealed, and he coughed up blood as he retreated. Kill him. Skin him. Pull out his bones. Imprison his soul. Kill him. Dao Yuan was so terrified that his body started trembling violently, and he let out a piercing roar. Dao Slave 21's eyes turned bloodshot. He could sense that Dao Slave 19's presence had already disappeared. A wave of grief and indignation filled his heart and soul, and with one move, he charged towards Su Ming. The double monthly votes event has started. 1 vote is equal to 2 votes. I'm begging for monthly votes. I'm bursting with power. I'm begging for monthly votes. Everyone's begging for votes. We're already behind. Can't we kill our way up? I'm going to explode. I'm going to blow up for 3 days in a row. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 821. In the last 3 days of the year, the monthly votes were ranked 8th. I am unwilling, very unwilling. Is this the result of Chiomo's last month? I am unwilling, so I want to erupt. I will erupt today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. I will use my eruption to exchange for the monthly votes. Please give me the monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 822. From the moment Su Ming stepped out of the 9th summit to the moment he devoured Dao Slave 19 with the candle dragon's body, he had already reached his limit. He had gained complete control over the situation after a lot of calculations. He did not come into contact with Dao Slave 19, but instead used Dao Yuan's danger as a hostage, as if he was attacking the root of the problem, causing Dao Slave 19 to lose the initiative and be restricted in his steps. Almighties in the 3rd step were not people Su Ming could fight against. His body might be incredibly sturdy, but the difference between their levels of cultivation was enough for him to not be able to last long under his opponent's divine abilities before he crumbled. And this was because while Dao Slave's levels of cultivation were not suppressed too badly in the land of berserkers, it was still affected slightly, causing some of their divine abilities to be unable to be used as freely as they were in the world outside. Yet even so, Su Ming still paid the price of being heavily injured and still could not kill Dao Yuan. As he retreated swiftly, blood continued trickling out of the corners of his mouth. He glared at Dao Yuan, who was still making a ruckus in the distance, and at Dao Slave 21, who was charging towards him. Su Ming knew that he was not his opponent in the face of a powerful enemy, but even if he was as weak as an ant, he still had to have the courage to fight back and bare his fangs. I've fought countless battles in my life, and I've only narrowly escaped death. This disaster today is even more difficult than when Tion descended in the past. But for the 9th summit, so what if I die? Su Ming threw his head back and laughed loudly. In this moment of danger, he let go of everything. As he retreated, he lifted his left hand with the back of his hand facing downwards, and at the same time he brought forth the power of destiny. He pressed his palm against the center of his brows. He was no longer a teenager at that moment, but a young man. This was a change that had occurred when he stepped into life cultivation realm. As Su Ming pressed his left hand against the center of his brows, the power of destiny erupted from his body with a bang. The baby and the purple-haired man's figures appeared around Su Ming's body. These two figures instantly overlapped with Su Ming, but at the instant they did so, Dao Slave 21 took a step forward and closed in on Su Ming. This Dao Slave, who could execute the 3rd step in the land of berserkers, was so strong that it was difficult for him to compare to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors in the world outside. In fact, they were not even on the same level. They might be lords of world planes, but those who had just stepped into the third step were already lords of world planes, and those who had reached the later stage of the third step were also known as lords of world planes. The 5 Tao slaves were only in the initial stage of the third step. At that moment, their cultivation bases were suppressed in the land of berserkers, so they could bring out power that was between the second and third step. All of this was because of the constellation robes on their bodies, and there were not just 5 of them. All the people on the ships in the Immortals galaxy, besides the land of berserkers, were wearing constellation robes. In truth, the constellation robe had the power to resist the laws in the land of berserkers. It could allow a person's cultivation base to not suffer too many restrictions in this place. Logically speaking, the Immortals should have done everything in their power to obtain it, so that when the Immortals descended, their cultivation bases would not be affected too much. There were plenty of these constellation robes in Morning Tao sect, but only the disciples of Morning Tao sect would have them. The Immortals were only feudal lords under the power of Morning Tao sect, and they were forbidden from owning constellation robes. That was one of the reasons. The other reason was that these starry robes were all child starry robes. They did not have such strange effects on their own, and neither would they not be suppressed by the laws in the land of berserkers. The thing that allowed these child starry robes to possess such power was the sacred constellation robe on Dao Yuan's body. It was like a center. All the people who wore the child starry robe had to listen to the orders of the sacred constellation robe they belonged to. They could not fight back. It was a form of control, but it would not affect the minds and minds of the people who wore the child starry robes. However, there would be a master in their thoughts. This master was none other than the owner of the starry saint robe that they were wearing. Only the existence of the sacred constellation robes could allow the child starry robes to possess the power to not be too affected by the laws in the land of berserkers. If the Immortals wanted to obtain the child starry robes, they had to become someone else's slaves. If they did not want to do so, and instead set their sights on the sacred constellation robes, then they would face the threat of extermination. Because in Morning Tao sect, only the direct descendants of the Tao family could possess the sacred constellation robes. It did not matter what level of cultivation they had or what their personality was like. As long as they were direct descendants of the Tao family, they would be given the sacred constellation robe when they were born. As they grew up, they could use the sacred constellation robe to build their own force of power. The greater the force of power, the greater the might of the sacred constellation robe. In fact, it could even cause the direct descendants of the Tao family to increase their level of cultivation by leaps and bounds. With Dao Yuan's personality and level of cultivation, the team he built was in truth just the weakest in Morning Tao sect. There were only thousands of cultivators among them, and there were only Tao slaves 19, 21, 31, 41, 51. There were only 5 of them in the third step. The others' levels of cultivation varied, but besides those 5, the ones with the highest level of cultivation were only those who had attained completion in the second step. That was why when Dao Yuan passed through the land of the Immortals, the people from the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors like Di Tian did not bother with him, much less greet him, even though he was one of the young lords of Daosor's sect. However, under the effects of the sacred constellation robe, these 5 Tao slaves in the third step could bring out an incredibly powerful level of cultivation in the land of berserkers, which was why they had become Su Ming's great disaster. At that moment, when Su Ming executed the power of destiny, Tao slave 21's face turned dark. He had followed Dao Yuan's orders to kill Su Ming. In his eyes, Su Ming was a despicable and shameless person who only knew how to use schemes and schemes. If he fought against him head-on, then he was confident that he could immediately kill Su Ming with a full-powered strike. At the instant he charged towards Su Ming with a dark expression. A dark light shone in Su Ming's eyes. The illusion of the baby around him was swiftly fusing with the purple-haired man's shadow, but at that moment, a wave of abyss death aura that gave Su Ming a sense of familiarity erupted from behind him. As that aura erupted, Yu Xian's face turned as pale as a corpse's. She took a step out from behind Su Ming, then lifted her right hand right in front of him and pushed her palm towards the incoming Tao Slave 21. As she pushed her palm forward, a powerful wave of abyss death aura erupted from Yuxian's body and crashed into the incoming Tao Slave 21 with a bang. "You're just asking for death." Tao Slave 21 snorted coldly, and he didn't dodge in the slightest as he pointed his finger towards Yuxian's incoming palm. It was as if a star had condensed on his finger, and it emitted a dazzling light. At the instant it collided with Yuxian's palm, a rumbling that surged into the sky resounded. Yuxian spat out a mouthful of blood as her body staggered back, and even her eyes had lost their usual liveliness. It was also at that moment that the baby around Su Ming completely fused with the purple-haired man. His hair instantly turned gray, and his body turned into that of a boy about 7 or 8 years old. A wave of power that was incredibly similar to Yu Xian's abyss death aura erupted from Su Ming's body. Su Ming's face was pale, and he looked like a dead man. At that moment, he looked incredibly similar to Yu Xian, as if they had come from the same source. Gray light shone in Su Ming's eyes. At the instant Yu Xian retreated, he rushed towards Tao Slave 21 without any hesitation. When he lifted his right hand, he swung it forward, and the world immediately roared. A law that made time flow in reverse filled the area, and Tao Slave 21 could not help but freeze for a moment, but it was only for a moment. Yet at that moment, Su Ming held the killing sword in his right hand and swung it diagonally forward. When it sliced past him like a bolt of lightning, Yu Xian gritted her teeth and rushed forward again to fight against the Tao Slave in a 1-versus-1 battle with Su Ming. Booming sounds surged into the sky, and Su Ming coughed up blood. When he fell back, Yu Xian laughed brokenly and retreated as well. The two of them attacked at the same time, but they could only make Tao Slave 21 sway. Soon, a powerful ray of starlight covered the entire area before Tao Slave 21 and shot towards Su Ming and Yu Xian. "Die, the two of you." A ferocious expression appeared on Tao Slave 21's face. When he took a step forward, an even stronger booming sound traveled forth. Su Ming's entire body trembled, and he tumbled backwards like a kite with its string snapped. He coughed up a huge mouthful of blood, and his injuries were close to death. Yu Xian was in the same state. In anguish, she looked at Tao Slave 21 walking towards him from the distance, then turned her head around to look at Su Ming. "Huh, kill the man. Leave the woman. Damn it, I'll definitely skin him alive. Even if he dies, he'll regret hurting me." Dao Yuan screamed in excitement. Tao Slave 21 nodded. With a step forward, he was less than 100 feet away from Su Ming and Yu Xian. A ferocious expression appeared on his face, and at the instant killing intent shone in his eyes, the starlight around him turned into sharp spikes. When he lifted his right hand, those spikes erupted with a bang, and they were about to charge towards Su Ming and Yu Xian. Su Ming bit the tip of his tongue, causing his dazed mind to clear up slightly due to his heavy injuries. There was no despair in his eyes, only calmness. It was a fearlessness towards death. Almost at the instant Tao Slave 21 walked towards them, Su Ming grabbed Yu Xian with his right hand. This was the first time he held her hand, and it was very cold, as if it belonged to a dead person. "Are you afraid?" Su Ming asked with a smile. "No." Yu Xian was momentarily stunned. There was still blood at the corners of her lips on her pale face, but a beautiful smile bloomed on her face as she shook her head. Once he grabbed Yu Xian's hand, Su Ming dragged her behind him without any hesitation. At the same time, he lifted his left hand and swung it before him. As the world rumbled and distorted, Su Ming's statue of the god of berserkers appeared and shielded him, and Yu Xian behind him to face Tao Slave 21 Starlight Divine Ability. Tao Slave 21 laughed coldly and brought out his full power, turning into an endless amount of starlight that closed in on Su Ming's statue of the god of berserkers in the span of a breath. At the instant a loud bang that shook the world reverberated in the air, Su Ming's statue of the god of berserkers was torn to shreds under Tao Slave 21's attack. It completely crumbled, and the starlight shot out, causing Su Ming to cough up blood. His injuries erupted, and his body was covered in blood. His consciousness faded, and he fell back with Yuxian. Yuxian was in a slightly better state. She dragged Su Ming as she retreated. Blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth, and despair appeared on her face. The first night watch at dawn. This is the second night watch. Today, I want the fifth night watch. I want the monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 823. Dao Slave 21 let out a cold harumph and took a step forward. He was confident that if he attacked this time, the two of them would definitely die. Almost at the same time, he took a step forward. Dao Yuan flew out from behind him with an excited look on his face and charged towards Su Ming. Dao Slave, move back. Let me personally take action. Didn't you want to kill me just now? I'm going to enjoy the girl beside you right in front of you. I'm going to let you see it with your own eyes. As Dao Yuan laughed madly, he closed in on Su Ming. As Su Ming and Yu Xian retreated, they were already close to the ruin around the ninth summit. Dao Slave 21 stopped moving and let his young master fly past him to close in on Su Ming and Yu Xian. Yet right at the instant Dao Yuan lifted his right hand to seize Yu Xian, a great presence that caused all the people in the area to be shocked and apprehensive suddenly erupted from the ninth summit with a bang. The strength of that presence caused the world to tremble and an endless amount of vortexes to appear in the seawater. It caused the sky to tremble, and even the hearts of the yellow dragon and the 3 Dao slaves who were fighting against him shuddered when they sensed that presence. This is your Grandpa Crane's territory. I was just taking a nap, and you dare to offend me? Get lost. A voice filled with mighty pressure came with a bang from the ninth summit, and it shook the sky and earth. At the instant that incredibly powerful presence appeared, not only did it cause the hearts of the 3 Dao slaves who were fighting against the yellow dragon to tremble, it also shocked Dao Yuan and Dao Slave 21, who were executing their divine abilities to kill Su Ming. This is the presence of Solar Culpa. Dao Slave 21's expression changed drastically. He did not have time to think. He grabbed the dumbfounded Dao Yuan and turned into a long arc that charged backwards. Dao Yuan screamed. As he shuddered, shock and terror appeared on his face. The presence of Solar Culpa. There's no mistaking this. This is a mighty cultivator who has reached Solar Culpa realm. He's only one step away from plain Culpa realm. Dao Slave 21's face turned stark pale, and his mind was in a mess. He had not expected that he would run into such a dangerous situation in the land of berserkers. However, at that instant, a hint of doubt appeared in his heart. He immediately lifted his right hand, and a determined look appeared on his face. An item appeared in his hand, and he instantly crushed it. It was a green medicinal pill. The instant it was crushed, a shocking rumble spread out. As the rumbles echoed, the world trembled and a ripple spread out. However, the ripple did not contain much destructive power. Instead, it gave off a green light that covered an area of several hundred kilometers. Dao Slave 21 stared at the cyan light. When he saw that the color of the cyan light hadn't changed in the slightest, a strange and angry expression appeared on his face. You're not a great cultivator in Solar Culpa realm. Young master, there are no great cultivators in Solar Culpa realm here. That was an illusory Dao art. As Dao Slave 21 roared, he no longer retreated. Instead, he charged towards Su Ming and Yu Xian once again. By his side, Dao Yuan was momentarily stunned. He knew that the medicinal core, just now, was mourning Dao Sex Culpa seeking core. This core could test whether there was the power of plain Culpa in a certain area, and it could also determine whether there were people who had reached plain Culpa realm in that area. If its color had changed, then it meant that there was someone in plain Culpa realm around. But the color of the medicinal core had not changed even after it had spread out several hundreds of leagues. This meant that no matter how the presence had spread out, in truth, there was not a single person in plain Culpa realm in that area. Once Dao Yuan registered what was going on, he was filled with exasperation. He charged towards Su Ming and Yu Xian, whose consciousness had faded away. He was so quick that he closed in on them in the blink of an eye. "How dare you lie to me? I will kill all of you with my own hands. Tao Slave 21, protect me by the side. Just watch as I crush their bones and scatter their ashes." As Dao Yuan charged forward, he saw that he was about to close in on Su Ming and Yu Xian. He lifted his right hand, intending to seize Su Ming, whose consciousness had faded away. At that moment, enraged roars came from the indistinct rune, and soon after, figures flew out. They were the people who had stayed in the Ninth Summit over the years. They were willing to die in battle for the Ninth Summit, to protect it, and to repay the kindness Su Ming had shown them in the past. At that moment, during that moment of crisis, they rushed out without any hesitation. The person in the lead was an old man. He was in the Berserker soul realm, but his level of cultivation was not high. However, at the instant he walked out, he charged towards Dao Yuan without any regard for his own life, trying to stop him from killing Su Ming and Yu Xian. "You're just asking for death," Dao Yuan screamed shrilly. He changed the direction of his right hand and rammed his fist against the old man's incoming body, but at the instant his fist closed in, a bizarre smile appeared on the old man's face, and with a bang he self-destructed. As he self-destructed, his cultivation base crumbled, and the ripples of power that erupted from his body rushed towards Dao Yuan. Blood gushed into the air and sprayed all over the area. Some of it landed on Su Ming and Yu Xian's bodies. Su Ming's consciousness had originally been about to fade away due to his heavy injuries, but once that blood landed on him, thick red capillaries immediately appeared in his eyes. His consciousness was swiftly returning to his body. His body trembled, and in his ears, the old man's long string of laughter before his death reached him. "Sir Su Ming, I am indebted to the Ninth Summit for taking care of me for so many years. Today, I will repay your kindness with my death." At the same time the old man died, people charged out from the ruin behind Su Ming. Some of them even grabbed Su Ming and Yu Xian and pulled them towards the ruin. One person after another, and the booming sounds of self-destruction rose into the air, affecting Dao Yuan's body. The booming sounds of self-destruction continued, and in the blink of an eye, more than 10 people had chosen to self-destruct. "Sir Su Ming, I will repay your kindness. Sir Su Ming, I will repay your kindness with my death. I will repay your kindness with my death. Sir Su Ming, if there is a next life, we will meet again." The long string of laughter before death rose into the air. More people rushed out and chose to self-destruct to hold back Dao Yuan and save Su Ming. All of this caused Su Ming's consciousness to return to his body at that instant. He was clear-headed, but he could no longer bring out even a single bit of his cultivation base. The heavy injuries in his body had already caused him to be at the end of his rope. His eyes were bloodshot. He could only watch the people dying and listen to the cries of gratitude. As his body trembled, he let out a hoarse roar. Even more people flew out from beside him. Among them were the elderly and the young. These were the tribe members who lived in the Ninth Summit, and at that moment, they used their hot-bloodedness and self-destruction to fulfill the promise they had made when they lived in the Ninth Summit all those years ago. They swore to protect it with their lives. Tears fell from Yu Xian's eyes. She looked at all of this in a daze. She looked at the people dying and listened to their voices as well as Su Ming's hoarse roars. More tears fell from her eyes. Dao Yuan's body was forcefully held back. He watched Su Ming and Yu Xian being dragged into the ruin, and in the midst of his rage, Dao Slave 21 took a step forward. He lifted his right hand coldly and swung it forward. Immediately, some of the people who had rushed out of the ruin were torn to shreds before they could self-destruct. The 100 Lease rune was also trembling violently at that moment. Once Dao Slave 21 closed in and struck with his palm, starlight erupted from it, and the rune crumbled once again. As it crumbled and Dao Slave 21 attacked, the 100 Lease rune became 80 Lease, 60 Lease, 40 Lease. Dao Slave 21's expression was cold and aloof. As he continued shattering the rune, He also killed all the people who flew out of the ninth summit. Dao Yuan was right behind him, and with a bloodthirsty look on his face, he charged forward excitedly. Within the rune, Su Ming and Yu Xian were being carried by the 4 people living in the ninth summit. They were charging forward without care for anything else, intending to bring them back to the ninth summit. Tears fell from their eyes. As the booming sounds rang in their ears, they knew that not only would the rune crumble a little more, their companions would also die. When there were less than 10 leaves left of the runes crumbling, the 4 people carrying Su Ming and Yu Xian roared together and pushed Yu Xian and Su Ming closer to the ninth summit. They turned around swiftly and chose to self-destruct without any hesitation. As they self-destructed at the same time, they stirred up a wave of rumbling that charged towards Dao's slave 21, who had instantly caught up to them. However, these 4 people's self-destruction was nothing to Dao slave 21. His body shot through the 4 people's self-destruction, and like a cat toying with mice, he grabbed Su Ming and Yu Xian's bodies, which were being pushed away at a moderate pace. However, at the instant he was about to grab them, more than 100 people flew out from beside Su Ming and Yu Xian, who were being pushed back. At the same time, 3 more people grabbed Su Ming and Yu Xian and pulled them back hastily. Su Ming's heart was bleeding. His hoarse roars echoed in the air, but he could not summon even a single bit of his cultivation base. The injuries in his body were too severe, so severe that if he was not in life cultivation realm, he would have immediately died. Even though his body was continuously recovering, the speed at which he recovered could not compare to the speed at which he was being destroyed. There were rays of starlight in his body at that moment, and they were continuously destroying all signs of his life. Blood continued flowing out of his body, and it was the same for Yu Xian. There was a dazed look on her face, and besides tears, there was only despair. Su Ming could only watch helplessly as the near 100 people who had blocked his path and stopped Dao's slave 21 from closing in on him were instantly enveloped by the starlight. There were no screams of pain, no booming sounds. There was only a mass of flesh and blood that flew into the air once the starlight disappeared. All of them died. Su Ming was not too familiar with these people. He had only saved them when he killed Sima Xin in the past, and gave them a home in the ninth summit. On this day, they had used their lives to repay Su Ming's kindness. However, this kindness was not great in Su Ming's eyes, and what they had repaid him was far too great. Weeping sounds came from the 3 people behind Su Ming. These 3 people had Su Ming and Yu Xian in their arms, and as they charged forward, they were already less than 10,000 feet away from the ninth summit. However, even if they managed to reach that distance, so what? Under Dao Slave 21's leisurely divine ability as he toyed with them, his irresistible power, and Su Ming had already lost his power of cultivation, everything seemed to be unchangeable. However, it was precisely in this unchangeable situation that Su Ming could see just how important a person's emotions were. They knew that it was useless, but they still wanted to give up their lives for it. This caused tears of blood to fall from Su Ming's eyes. Double monthly votes. Begging for monthly votes. Among the top 10 monthly votes, Begging for Demons is the one with the least votes today. To be continued. If you like this work, then please come to Starting Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 824. When the 3 people behind him threw Su Ming and Yu Xian towards the ninth summit, the 3 of them rushed towards the incoming Dao Slave 21. In the midst of the booming sounds of death, Su Ming let out the most shrill and forlorn roar of his life. As he roared, Dao Slave 21 walked past the blood fog formed by the 3 people's self-destruction. With an aloof expression on his face, Dao Yuan followed behind him with an excited look on his face. At that moment, they were still 5,000 feet away from the ninth summit, but this distance was useless. Even if they reached the ninth summit, it would still be useless. Yu Xian's mother's voice seemed to echo in her ears once again. As she spoke, The dazed look in her eyes gradually disappeared, and she looked towards Su Ming. Do you know why I'm called Yu Xian? Xian is a type of grass that forgets worries. I'm the grass that forgets worries in the rain. This is the name my mother gave me. She wanted me to forget about my sorrows and live happily for the rest of my life. My mother is calling me. I'm going to reunite with her. Before I leave, I want to give you a present. A smile appeared on her face. It was a very sincere and beautiful smile. She looked at Su Ming, then hugged him gently and kissed his blood-covered lips. At the instant she kissed him, a wave of abyss death aura surged into his body from Yu Xian's mouth and fused into his soul. At the same time, it turned into a loud bang. Su Ming's soul felt as if it was boiling. However, as his soul boiled, Yu Xian's lips turned colder. Gradually, the sparkle in her eyes completely disappeared, and only dullness was left. I've suffered a loss this time, but I'm very happy to have met you. Yu Xian let go of him, and her body fell to the ground. Su Ming's soul felt as if it was burning. At the same time, intense pain spread through his body. He could feel his soul swelling up madly. This feeling was enough to drive him mad. It was as if his blood was awakening and his soul was going through a metamorphosis. At that moment, the feeling of power that came with the pain was rising madly in Su Ming's body. He didn't know what Yu Xian gave him in the end, but he knew that this breath of aura was what his soul lacked. It was this breath of aura that made him feel familiar. At the same time, his soul seemed to be complete. At the same time, the awakening of the abyss erupted in his soul, but the sharp pain that came along with it drowned Su Ming, causing him to let out a shrill roar. Without any hesitation, he stretched out his hand and grabbed Yu Xian's hand, which had already lost consciousness and was unknown whether she was dead or alive, as if he wanted to grab hold of her body so that it would not fall to the ground. Yet at that moment, Dao Slave 21 had already taken a step forward. Starlight shone in his lifted right hand, and at the instant it was about to land on Su Ming, a figure walked out from the distortion of 5,000 feet behind Su Ming. It was Bai Su. She was dressed in white and looked incredibly beautiful. There was a smile on her face, and within that smile and in her gaze was a wild beauty. She walked past Su Ming, and like a moth flying into a flame, she rushed towards Dao, Slave 21. A presence of self-destruction spread out from her body at that instant. That presence was like the water from the river in the sky that spilled on the ground. Just like her life, I could do it too. These were the final words Bai Su said before she self-destructed. As she spoke, a loud bang that surged into the sky reverberated in the air before Su Ming. In the midst of that bang, Su Ming watched Bai Su disappear. He had gone mad. A wisp of white gauze tumbled backwards by his side as the ripples from the self-destruction spread out. He wanted to grab it, but he did not manage to. That white gauze flew further and further away, and if he wanted to grab it, he could only let go of Yu Xian's hand. He wanted to grab it, but the white gauze was getting further and further away. His grip on Yu Xian's hand gradually weakened, because the sharp pain coming from his soul at that moment was something Su Ming could not bear. It was a feeling as if his soul was about to explode. It was a madness that was about to awaken. In the end, Su Ming let go of Yu Xian's hand, which he was holding, in a state of helplessness. With her eyes closed, Yu Xian charged towards the ground along with the ripples. As tears fell from Su Ming's eyes, he went mad. He pressed his hand against his head. His eyes were bloodshot, and his roars were like the roars of a wild beast filled with despair. It was also at that moment that the yellow dragon in the sky let out a shrill roar and charged towards the ground. At that moment, it no longer paid any attention to the 3 Dao slaves. The only thought in its mind was to catch Yu Xian. It swept its body sideways and charged toward the ground. At the instant Yu Xian fell into the sea, it caught her and placed her on its back. A shrill roar tumbled out of the yellow dragon's mouth, and a large amount of abyss death aura erupted from its body. At the same time it surged into Yu Xian's body. The space in front of the yellow dragon shuddered, as if the entrance to another expanse cosmos was being forcefully opened by the abyss dragon's inborn divine ability. It wanted to take its young mistress away. There was grief on its face because it could sense that no matter how much abyss aura it poured into her, her young mistress was still slowly moving towards death. The three Dao slaves' arrival in the sky caused Dao Yuan to become even more arrogant. With a cold harumph, Dao Slave 21 shot through the area whereby Su had self-destructed and appeared right in front of Su Ming. With an aloof expression, he pointed at Su Ming with his right hand, and a large amount of starlight instantly spread out from his hand. That starlight covered Su Ming's body, causing him to be surrounded by starlight at that instant. As booming sounds rang in the air, Su Ming's body was torn to shreds and completely disintegrated. Only his palm remained as his right arm crumbled. When it flew out, the impact from his crumbling caught up to the white veil that was drifting further and further into the distance, and he caught it. As his left arm crumbled, only one finger remained, and it landed on the yellow dragon's body, right beside Yuxian. Su Ming thought that he had died, because at that moment he could sense that his soul had disappeared from the world. He could see his right hand seizing the white veil, and he could see his left index finger landing beside Yuxian. He could also see his eldest senior brother's statue, his second senior brother meditating, and Huzi snoring in his master's cave abode at the top of the 9th summit. He could see all of these things. He could also see the 4 Dao slaves as well as Dao Yuan. Besides these things, for the first time in his life, he sensed that there were 3 black spots that were different from his own soul. Those 3 black spots exuded 3 different wills, as if there were 3 other people's souls in his soul. These 3 people's souls seemed to have fused together with his soul to form the final 3 seals in his soul. These 3 seals had already become inseparable from his soul, and they should have been difficult to separate. But as Yuxian sent a mouthful of abyss death aura into his soul before she closed her eyes, it caused Su Ming's soul to either reach completion or mutate as it boiled. It caused his soul to sense the 3 seals. At the instant he noticed them, 3 hoarse and old voices appeared in Su Ming's mind. I originally thought that you would never be able to sense our existence. I originally thought that Hong Luo's death was an accident. Spread out your mind and let us leave. We will no longer be your seals, and you will no longer be our prison. If the 3 of us leave, we can help you get through this disaster. If the 3 of us leave, your soul will no longer be sealed. Spread out your mind. Don't you want to take revenge? Don't you want to personally kill those people? Don't you want to protect your 9th summit? Spread out your mind. The 3 of us will help you fulfill your wish. Spread out your mind. That woman called by Su might be dead, but her body is unique. She shouldn't be a berserker. Her soul is just a projection. If you spread out your mind, I can let you see where the real her is right now. Spread out your mind. For you, for us, we've been sealed for far too long, and you've also been sealed for far too long. Why don't we spread out? The 3 old voices echoed in Su Ming's mind and refused to disappear even after a long time had passed. At the same time, in the midst of the booming sounds, the rune of 5,000 feet around the 9th summit completely shattered, revealing the 9th summit completely before the 4 Dao slaves and Dao Yuan. At that moment, only the trembling Qian Shun and the similarly trembling bald crane were left on the 9th summit. I thought that there would be something good in this place, but it turns out there's a piece of trash and a bald crane. Dao, slave, 31, 41, 51, the 3 of you immediately flatten this mountain. There's a cave abode on the mountain. Open it and see what sort of treasure is inside. Dao, slave, 21, go down there and bring that woman to me. Even if she's about to die, I still want to have a taste of her. Don't let them escape. Dao Yuan smiled coldly and pointed at the 9th summit. When he spoke, the 3 Dao slaves turned into 3 long arcs and charged towards the top of the 9th summit. As for Dao Slave 21, he was charging towards the Abyss Dragon, who was desperately sending Abyss Death aura into Yu Xian's body in an attempt to save her, yet he himself was completely defenseless when it came to saving others. The distorted space before the Abyss Dragon was slowly being torn apart at that moment, and a crack appeared. However, with Dao Slave 21 speed He could stop the abyss dragon before it could flee into the crack. Yet right at the instant, the 4 Tao slaves split up and charged forward. A mighty pressure that seemed to have gathered from all directions in the world suddenly erupted forth. That mighty pressure appeared incredibly suddenly. Almost at the instant it appeared, the expressions of the 4 Tao slaves changed drastically. At the same time, the space before Tao slave 21 distorted, and an illusory shadow manifested. That illusory shadow was indistinct. It looked like an old man, but if anyone took a closer look, they would find that it was not. Instead, it was a young man. These two appearances overlapped with each other, giving off an incredibly bizarre feeling. You're not dead. Tao slave 21's eyes went wide. The young man who had appeared was naturally Su Ming, whom he had just killed. At the instant he saw Su Ming, Tao slave 21's expression changed, and his heart was filled with shock, because at that instant, the mighty pressure spreading out from Su Ming's body made his heart pound in fear. I no longer have the strength to shout for monthly votes, but how many monthly votes can there be? There's still one more chapter, and I can't accept that I only have these few monthly votes for today. To be continued. If you like this work, then please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 825. His skin crawled in fear. Su Ming lifted his head, and a ghastly smile appeared at the corners of his lips. However, if anyone took a closer look, they would find that the one smiling was not him, but the old man whose body had overlapped with his. At the instant that smile appeared, Su Ming lifted his right hand and seized Tao slave 21. Tao slave 21's expression changed, and as he swung his arm, starlight immediately surrounded his body. The power that belonged to the third step erupted from his body, but the endless starlight seemed to have become transparent before Su Ming, and it shot through his body. Su Ming lifted his right hand but did not stop. He seized Tao slave 21. At the instant Tao slave 21's expression changed, and he swiftly retreated in shock. Su Ming spoke languidly with that bizarre smile on his face. Blood Sun. With that one word, Tao slave 21's entire body immediately turned red, and an illusory blood-red sun appeared around him. At the instant it appeared, Tao slave 21 coughed up a mouthful of blood, and it was difficult for him to retreat. In the midst of his fear, his body was swept towards Su Ming, and his throat was seized by Su Ming's right hand. Half a step into Solar Culpa realm, Tao slave 21 let out a shrill scream, but his voice soon fell silent. Once Su Ming's right hand seized his throat, Tao slave 21's body immediately turned even redder. In an instant, a large amount of blood erupted from his body, and in the blink of an eye, Tao slave 21 in Su Ming's hand turned into a dried-up corpse without any blood. He breathed his last. From the act of a cat toying with a mouse, he walked towards his death. When Su Ming released his right hand and swung his arm before him, the blood that Tao slave 21 coughed up immediately gathered together and turned into a blood-red mirror before Su Ming. As the ripples in the mirror distorted, a galaxy and a cultivation planet were revealed. There was an exquisite tower on that cultivation planet, and within it was a woman in white. She was looking into the distance with a dazed expression, and there was a dazed look on her face. Her appearance was exactly the same as by Su's. I fulfill my promise. Once these words tumbled out of Su Ming's mouth, a ray of blood-red light flew out of his body. Once it turned into a blood-red sun in midair, it charged into the sky. All of this happened too quickly. Before Tao Yuan and the other 3 Tao slaves could react, Tao slave 21 had already turned into a dried corpse. Tao Yuan's pupils shrank, and as he screamed in shock, he swiftly retreated. The 3 Tao slaves no longer cared about going to the 9th summit, but instead charged towards Su Ming. At that moment, the overlapping image of the old man was no longer on Su Ming's body. He was the only one in midair. He did not bother about the 3 Tao slaves coming towards him. Instead, he turned his head around and quietly looked at the abyss dragon, who was carrying Yu Xian on its back as the crack in the air opened up on the surface of the sea. Yu Xian had her eyes closed and remained unmoving on the abyss dragon's back. Su Ming watched her disappear into the crack with the abyss dragon, and a mischievous girl who had called him Little Dummy, Su with a grin appeared before his eyes. Dummy Su, if you don't answer, I'll deduct a medicinal pill. Little Dummy Su, look at how pretty those big fish are in the sea. Help me catch one. Little Su, how about calling me Big Sister? Hurry up, call me Big Sister. Little Su, that sea giant glared at me. Go and beat him up. Su, dummy, the sunlight is too poisonous. Help me hold the umbrella. In the midst of Su Ming's dazed expression, overlapping images immediately appeared on his body once again. This time, it was not an old man, but a bald man. That man was incredibly big and built, and once his body overlapped with Su Ming's, he looked at the 3 Dao slaves coming towards him with a ferocious smile. As for Su Ming, he maintained his motion of turning his head around and looked at the crack gradually disappearing into the sea. Before the abyss dragon left, it let out a mournful roar. Do you know why I'm called Yu Xian? Xian is a type of daylily, and I'm the grass in the rain. My mother wants me to be happy for the rest of my life, without sorrow. I'll give you a present. Su Ming's eyes became wet, but he was just a soul. He had no tears. You could have left first, Su Ming mumbled. By Su's smile, when she turned her head around, appeared before his eyes again. That smile was incredibly beautiful, and there was a reluctance to part as she gradually left into the distance. At that moment, the man whose body had overlapped with Su Ming laughed ferociously and appeared right in front of the 3 Dao slaves. When he lifted his right hand, a ray of green light erupted from his body with a bang. It turned into a green sun, causing the world to lose its color. Shrill screams of pain tumbled out of the 3 Dao slaves' mouths. When 2 consecutive bangs reverberated in the air, Dao Slave 31 and Dao Slave 41, the 2 almighties in the 3rd step dressed in constellation robes, melted right before Su Ming and were reduced to ashes. Clearly, everything about their bodies had been burned away by the green sun. The remaining Dao Slave 51 retreated as if he had gone mad. A large amount of cracks appeared on his body, and green smoke spread out from it. A feeling of death filled his body. He returned to Dao Yuan's side, grabbed the trembling Dao Yuan, and fled into the distance. The shadow of the man who had overlapped with Su Ming's body turned into a wisp of green smoke that flew out and fused with the green sun in midair. He turned his head around and cast a glance at Su Ming, then laughed loudly as he charged into the sky. With some unknown method, he disappeared. I'm the last. A hoarse voice echoed in Su Ming's illusory body, and the shadow of a middle-aged man with white hair overlapped with Su Ming. He lifted his right hand and pointed at Dao Yuan and Dao Slave 51 in the distance. With it, Dao Slave 51 let out a shrill scream of pain. Moths instantly crawled out of his body, and, in the blink of an eye, he turned into an innumerable number of moths. These moths flapped their wings and formed a ball of moths in midair. Like the sun, they headed straight for the Dao Yuan. Dao Yuan shuddered, and despair appeared on his face. However, in the midst of that despair was the madness that came after his mind crumbled. He lifted his right hand and pointed to the sky. With my life, with my sacred constellation robe as the guide, all before he could finish speaking, the sun formed by the moths closed in on him. But at that instant, a wave of death descended from the sky and landed on the sun formed by the moths, causing them to freeze for a moment before disappearing into the sky. At the same time, Dao Yuan's voice rang out in its entirety without being interrupted. All the owners of my son's robe, descend to the land of berserkers. As he spoke, the constellation robe on Dao Yuan's body immediately shone with a monstrous amount of starlight, causing the sky to turn into a starry sky. As the starry sky rotated, it turned into a gigantic vortex, and within it, longships could be vaguely seen charging forward. It's not that I didn't keep my promise, but there's someone who doesn't want me to help you. He wants these people to descend and open a path for them. That person's level of cultivation is much higher than mine. That's an ancient presence. The white-haired man turned into an illusory moth and left Su Ming's body, disappearing into the sky. I didn't fulfill my promise, but if you manage to get out in the future and your soul returns to your physical body, I will help you once. It doesn't matter whether it's the 4th or the 5th chapter. I've used all my strength when I erupted today. Can you give me the monthly ticket? To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 826. The 3rd volume is nearing its end, and the 4th volume will be released in the next 2 days. In the 4th volume, I am confident that there will be a rise, and the true meaning of seeking the devil will be revealed. There will be a rise tomorrow, and there will be a rise the day after. I will do my best to write it. Here are the monthly votes. Everyone, please help me. I'm begging everyone for a vote. I'm begging everyone for a monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 827. When the illusory moth disappeared into the sky, Su Ming lifted his head and saw the endless galaxy rotating with loud rumbling sounds. He saw long ships charging forward in the rotating galaxy. Each of those long ships was entirely black, and there were several people dressed in constellation robes on each of them. Dao Yuan laughed arrogantly on the surface of the sea in the distance. The sacred constellation robe on his body was shining with a brilliant dark light that surrounded him, forming a tight defense. Su Ming averted his gaze from the sky and looked at the spot where Yuxian had left, at the spot where Bai Su had disappeared into the air, at the lonely 9th summit, and at the endless amount of severed limbs floating on the surface of the sea. They're all dead, Su Ming mumbled. His body was no longer corporeal at that moment, but had become so illusory that it was practically transparent. Grief appeared on his face, and he no longer bothered himself with Dao Yuan and the numerous longships that had descended from the sky. He lifted his foot and walked slowly towards the 9th summit. Exhaustion, death in his heart, grief, and all sorts of other emotions filled Su Ming's heart. He returned to the 9th summit and stood outside his master's cave abode at the top of the mountain. Even at that moment, Su Ming still stood there, using his body to protect the 9th summit's wall. The killing sword was in his right hand, and he held it in an illusory grip, causing the sword to be tilted to the bottom right of his body. The blade of the sword was very stable, but the tip of the sword was trembling slightly. That trembling was the sword spirit's desire for blood and the anticipation of slaughter. Su Ming stood there quietly. His hair was like a firework that could not be blown away by the sea breeze. It was releasing his soul, and at that moment, it was as if Su Ming had truly become one with the 9th summit. One person, one sword, one protection. His body was in an illusory state, and not a single ripple of power could be detected within him. The only thing that existed within him was the power of his soul. That soul could be said to be his Atman, a form of divine sense. It was the only undying and unyielding will Su Ming had left. As he looked at the sky, a smile gradually appeared on Su Ming's lips. However, there was no hint of carefreeness in that smile. Instead, it was filled with sorrow. In silence, Qian Chen's body was still trembling, but he gritted his teeth and went to Su Ming's side. He brought out a black dagger from his bosom. He was very afraid, so afraid that his body trembled nonstop. Sweat poured down his body, but true courage came from being fearless in the face of danger. It also came from possessing the will to not retreat in the face of fear. This was also courage. As the bald crane laughed wryly, it finally put away the thought of escaping. It let out a long sigh in its heart and flew to Su Ming's side. It glared at the sky, and a grave and crazed look that had never appeared before appeared on its face. I'm sorry. I promised to take you to a place where you can leave the land of berserkers, but I didn't manage to do it in time, Su Ming said softly as he looked at the sky. Chen shook his head as his body trembled, but he didn't say anything. At this moment, the many longships in the sky suddenly shot toward the ground like pitch-black rays of light amidst a series of sharp rumbles. In the blink of an eye, there were 1,000 longships that appeared in the world beyond the ninth summit. Waves of mighty pressure that was so powerful that it was difficult to describe spread out from the thousands of Tao slaves dressed in sun constellation robes on the longships. Even though there were no longer any Tao slaves in the third step among them, the shock and destruction brought by thousands of second-step cultivators was sometimes even more shocking than that of 5 third-step cultivators. The aloof gazes and Dao Yuan's crazed roars once he regained his arrogance caused the disaster to reach its peak at that moment. Kill him. Destroy this mountain. Don't leave a single blade of grass behind. Damn it, he almost killed me. He almost killed me. Dao Yuan's eyes were bloodshot. During that instant just now, he had been enveloped by death. It was the closest he had ever been to death in his life, and it had caused the fear in his heart to reach its peak. Once he felt that he was safe, that fear turned into anger. Murderous intent shone in the eyes of the thousands of Tao slaves in the near 1,000 longships. They did not attack alone, unless absolutely necessary. The people from Morning Tao sect would not fight alone. Almost the moment Dao Yuan's voice rang in the air, the thousands of people flew out together and turned into thousands of long arcs that charged towards the ninth summit. Their presence was shocking, and it surpassed the mighty pressure brought by the 5 Dao slaves in the third step. There was also a suffocating presence about them. Chen's eyes were bloodshot. As he roared madly, he wanted to rush out regardless of the cost. But the moment he lifted his foot, Su Ming's left hand had already landed on his shoulder. The power of Su Ming's Atman surged into Chen's mind, and with a jolt, a buzzing sound rang out in his head, and he fainted. Su Ming gently pushed his body backwards, and he flew towards the ninth summit's cave abode. Many have already died. I don't want any more people to die. Su Ming mumbled. When his Atman spread out, it turned into a wave of impact that swept up the stunned bald crane by the side. When it was sent into the cave abode as well, the bald crane reacted to the situation. It trembled and stared at Su Ming blankly. It was as if only at that moment did it truly get to know Su Ming. As it stared at him, the eyes of the bald crane, who believed itself to be heartless, became wet. Help me take care of my senior brothers. When Su Ming spoke softly, he took a step towards the sky and charged towards the thousands of Tao slaves in the second step with a resolute look in his eyes. With the killing sword in his hand, he charged forward. Most of the thousands of Tao slaves had levels of cultivation that surpassed Su Ming's. This was a battle where there was absolutely no suspense. This was a single person fighting against thousands of people. A shocking bang reverberated in the air in an instant. The near 100 people right in front of the group had lifted their right hands and executed a divine ability. It turned into an endless amount of starlight that crashed into Su Ming's illusory body. Without the 3 souls sealed in his body, the instant the starlight touched Su Ming's illusory body, it was difficult for the transparent starlight to overlap and not touch each other, as if they did not exist in the same dimension. Instead, it was like an endless amount of sharp thorns that caused Su Ming's illusory body to swiftly crumble and turn into glittering sparks. Once most of them were extinguished, the remaining ones tumbled backwards and gathered together once again 1,000 feet away. They turned into Su Ming, but he was even more transparent, as if he would disappear if a gust of wind blew against him. However, at the instant Su Ming's body crumbled, he had slashed out with his sword. The might of that slash was the first slash he executed once his soul attained completion. That slash contained his soul and his abyss's awakening. It contained his origin divine ability. When that slash swept past the hundreds of people, it did not seem to contain any incredibly powerful destructive power. Instead, it was like a gentle breeze blowing past them. However, when Su Ming's body crumbled and an even weaker illusory figure gathered together again, nearly half of the hundreds of people Su Ming's slash had swept past started aging at the same time. It was as if time had been magnified endlessly on their bodies, and the circulation of their bodies had become much faster. Not only did their faces instantly age, a decaying presence also spread out from their bodies. Their hair turned gray, and wrinkles appeared on their faces. Most of their life force also disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if it had been devoured by space. In fact, there were about a dozen people who instantly turned into corpses because their levels of cultivation were not high and they did not have much life force left in them to begin with. Even their nascent divinities found it difficult to escape, and they withered away and died. At the same time, as the dozen people died and nearly 100 people's life force disappeared in a bizarre manner, wisps of white smoke spread out from their bodies and charged toward Su Ming. They instantly fused into his body, causing his frail body to become much more corporeal. Is this the origin divine ability I awakened to after my soul became complete? Su Ming mumbled. He could sense his soul becoming stronger at a maddening pace as the white smoke approached him. The life force he absorbed seemed to be something that his body lacked greatly. It was as if he had turned into a dried-up sponge that was continuously absorbing other people's life force to complete himself. However, this awakening came a little too late for Su Ming, because even if the sword slash had absorbed a large amount of life force, it still could not close the unchangeable gap between Su Ming and the thousands of Dao slaves. As Dao Yuan let out a piercing roar, and the thousands of Dao slaves closed in on him again, nearly 1,000 people executed their divine abilities. The starlight they stirred up was enough to replace all light in the world. As it filled the area, it looked like an ancient gigantic star beast that wanted to devour Su Ming. At the instant he was devoured, Su Ming suddenly came to an understanding. He had come to understand that this origin divine ability of his was the will of autumn. Even though it was not the color of autumn, the life force he absorbed was like autumn in his body. It was a fusion between death and life, and it was a change in the truest sense of the word. Autumn. When Su Ming spoke softly, his illusory body instantly shone with a red light. That was the color of autumn, and an endless amount of snow appeared out of nowhere around him. Those snowflakes fell down and withered away like leaves in autumn, causing people to think that they were snow at first glance, but when they looked at them a second time, they would find them to be fallen leaves. At the same time, Su Ming's level of cultivation erupted along with his epiphany. He rose from the initial stage of life matrix to the middle stage, and, as the snow and fallen leaves intersected with each other around him, the color of autumn on his body became stronger. When the thousands of Dao slaves closed in on him and the second wave of starlight, formed by nearly 1,000 people, submerged him, understanding appeared in Su Ming's eyes. At that instant, his level of cultivation moved from the middle stage of life matrix to the later stage of life matrix. With just one more step, he would be able to step into the second realm in life cultivation, life privation realm. Today, he continued to explode. This is the first chapter, and his monthly votes have fallen to the 8th place. Do you still have monthly votes? To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 828. And this step was not difficult to take, because Su Ming already knew what he lacked. Once he gained this epiphany, he came to a vague understanding that what he lacked was life force, the life force that came from all the people of Bright Yang. Right at that moment, a man's voice that seemed to have come from a long, long time ago reached Su Ming's soul. It was a voice that was unfamiliar to him, but also filled him with warmth and familiarity. Abyss Builder, Abyss Builder. These two voices were Su Ming's mumbling. As his words traveled forth and the starlight closed in, a shocking boom shook the sky and earth beyond the 9th summit. In the midst of that boom, the entire world seemed to have frozen for an instant. Su Ming's body instantly crumbled. Even if he had come to understand Abyss Builder, even if his level of cultivation had reached the later stage of life matrix, even if he had brought out the will of autumn at the final moment. However, before absolute power, all of these things were so weak that they could not even withstand a single blow. At the instant Su Ming's body crumbled, he might have gathered together another illusory body on the ninth summit. But this time, it was almost completely transparent. It was so faint that it was practically unnoticeable with the naked eye. A feeling of weakness that came from his soul filled Su Ming's mind. He staggered a few steps back, but he persevered and stood outside the cave abode at the top of the ninth summit. Even at that moment, he still wanted to protect the ninth summit. Even if his consciousness was about to disappear and he was about to truly die, he still persevered and stood there, even if he had already become transparent. As the booming sounds rang in the sky, dozens of Tao slaves immediately turned into skeletons and fell into the sea without letting out shrill screams of pain. They only had shocked expressions on their faces. Less than 50 of them had died. To them, this did not affect their foundation, but the thousands of people had grave expressions on their faces at that moment. Even though less than 50 of them had died, there were hundreds of them whose faces were pale. Most of their life force had been lost, and even their levels of cultivation had fallen by several realms. And all of this was done by Su Ming alone. Kill him. Go kill him for me. Damn it. All of you attack together and kill this person immediately. Destroy this mountain. He still hasn't chosen to escape and is fighting to the death here. It's obvious that this mountain is extremely important to him. Destroy this mountain and kill this person. Dao Yuan, who was hiding behind his thousands of Dao slaves, shouted in a shrill voice. Killing intent flickered in the eyes of the thousands of Dao slaves. This time, as they charged over, all of them unleashed their divine abilities and spread out. As they unleashed their divine abilities, a force that could destroy the heavens and earth erupted from their bodies. That power was enough to destroy Su Ming and the ninth summit at that moment. It would make his eldest senior brother, Qian Shun, and the others in the summit sink into eternal oblivion before they could even wake up. Su Ming lifted his weak head with great difficulty. His gaze fell on the excited Dao Yuan behind the thousands of Dao slaves. At the instant Su Ming's dull eyes looked towards Dao Yuan, the final ray of chilling light in his life gathered together. I have no grudge against living and dying with the ninth summit, but it's a pity that I didn't manage to kill Dao Yuan, who destroyed the ninth summit. I have no face to meet my senior brother in the underworld. Su Ming mumbled. At the instant the thousands of Dao slaves' divine abilities closed in on him, he lowered his head and looked at the killing sword in his hand. The tip of the sword was trembling, and he could sense the determination to slaughter the entire world coming from it. I still have 2 divine abilities. Su Ming could sense that he had reached his limit in his weakened state. Just as he was about to disappear, he lifted his left hand swiftly and pushed his palm against the ground beneath him. With it, the ground immediately started trembling with a bang. A wave of earthen aura surged out from the ninth summit, and the sea beneath it with a bang. It covered Su Ming's left hand and charged towards his illusory body, causing his left hand to immediately wither. At the same time, it looked like it was only skin and bones. White light surrounded it. This was the Surging Indulger's divine ability. It was one of the arts Su Ming had learned in Eastern Wastelands Tower. It was also the reason why the ancient existence in Een Death Vortex had taken notice of him. And it was also the key to lure out the 100,000 warriors from the Surging Indulgers and evil spirits that existed in the many worlds in Een Death Vortex. The Surging Indulgers' divine ability allowed them to refine their bodies with spirits. If Su Ming had a physical body, then the withered part would be his flesh and blood. He might seem to have withered away, but in truth, his flesh and blood had not decreased. The withered part of his flesh and blood was absorbed by the other parts of his body, causing his body to no longer be complete. It looked as if there was a gap in his body, and this allowed the art of the Surging Indulgers to use this withered left arm to absorb the power of other people's flesh and blood, allowing them to become complete once again. Yet in truth, This completion once again would cause the surging indulgers to become slightly stronger than before. However, Su Ming did not have a physical body at that moment, so the withered part was his soul. As Su Ming's left arm withered away, his illusory body gradually withered away before eventually disappearing completely. Only his right hand, which held the killing sword, had gathered all of Su Ming's Atman, and it had gained corporeal form, almost as if it had crystallized. The right hand that held the killing sword flew up at that instant. With the killing sword in hand, with Su Ming's will, at the instant the thousands of Dao slaves' divine abilities closed in on him, he charged towards Dao Yuan in the distance. He turned into a long arc that shook the sky, and as he charged forward with a speed that could shatter all space, he charged towards Dao Yuan. The sword was so quick that in the blink of an eye, it was already less than 1,000 feet away from Dao Yuan. There were Dao slaves blocking its path, but no matter who it was, none of them could avoid what was practically the final strike in Su Ming's life. At the instant it charged forward, Su Ming's Atman executed a divine ability he had learned from another race in Eastern Wasteland's tower. It was an art belonging to the evil spirits, and a large amount of black smoke erupted from Su Ming's crystallized right hand, which held the killing sword. As it gushed out, Su Ming's right hand gradually disappeared. At the instant his right hand completely disappeared, the black smoke that spread out turned into a ferocious face of a malicious spirit. It surrounded the killing sword, and as it roared, it brought the killing sword forward with a bang. Wherever it went, there would be nearly 100 Dao slaves blocking its path, but the instant they crashed into each other, a roar that shook the hearts and souls of the people tumbled out of the mouth of the malicious spirit. That roar reverberated in the air, and it looked as if it could freeze the world's operations. It caused the near 100 Dao slaves to freeze at the same time, and the divine abilities they executed froze, allowing the face of the malicious spirit to charge past the near 100 Dao slaves. It appeared right in front of Dao Yuan, whose face was filled with shock and fear as he screamed. The thousands of Dao slaves in the area could not save him in time. Su Ming's killing sword was too quick, and the ferocious face of the malicious spirit on it had even frozen the world's operations, causing them to only be able to watch everything happen. That sword contained Su Ming's life and everything else, and it swiftly pierced the center of Dao Yuan's brows. At the instant the sword pierced forward, the constellation robe on Dao Yuan's body started circulating rapidly as it heated up. Waves of starlight rotated, causing the ferocious face of the malicious spirit around the killing sword to let out a shrill scream of pain before it swiftly dissipated. However, another scream of pain tumbled out of Dao Yuan's mouth. His constellation robe was fighting against the ferocious face of the malicious spirit and could protect his body. But once the surging indulger's divine ability in Su Ming's killing sword gathered Su Ming's life, it started absorbing and devouring him. At the instant the constellation robe fought against the face of the malicious spirit, it forcefully sucked out a part of Dao Yuan's soul from his body. Dao Yuan's shrill screams of pain reverberated in the air. His soul was being swiftly devoured. At the same time, as his body trembled, he started withering away at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was a sign that all his flesh, blood, and essence were being sucked out. That pain was not any less than that of death by 1,000 cuts. However, the strength of the sacred constellation robe was such that all the direct descendants of Morning Dao sect would be given at the moment they were born. Even if it was difficult for Dao Yuan to bring out its full power, it still had its strong points. It forcefully preserved a wisp of Dao Yuan's soul, preventing him from dying. Even if Dao Yuan's body was only skin and bones at that moment, and his entire body was covered in dust, he was still alive. However, the pain he felt while he was still alive was much greater than when he was dead. His shrill screams of pain were hoarse, and he had lost all his strength. If the constellation robe had not locked down his soul, he would have died a long time ago. However, the lock and the absorption from Su Ming's killing sword were like a tug of war, causing Dao Yuan to suffer an intense pain that would make anyone else's consciousness crumble. However, it was difficult for Su Ming to last for long. His killing sword slowly lost its suction force, and the ferocious face of the malicious spirit also disappeared from midair. Everything about Su Ming's body was no longer there. Even the will that had gathered on the killing sword gradually turned into crystalline sparks that spread out. The killing sword let out a mournful cry. It might not have followed Su Ming for a long time, but during that short period of time, it had gained a sense of how to truly use its body as a sword. This made it infatuated, and when it sensed Su Ming's will fading away, its mournful cries spread in all directions. In the distance, the divine abilities of the thousands of Dao slaves had already covered the ninth summit. Under their might, the entire ninth summit was swiftly crumbling and disintegrating. It was as if everything could not be reversed. However, it was just as the final soul in Su Ming's body, the white-haired man who had turned into a moth, had said. There was someone who did not want him to attack. There was someone who wanted to intentionally open the gate so that the ships could enter the land of berserkers more smoothly. Similarly, there was someone who did not want Su Ming to die just like that. Su Ming, are you willing to become Death's child of Death's fragmented worlds? An ancient voice traveled forth slowly from the sky at that instant. Once that voice appeared, the entire world instantly froze. The thousands of Dao slaves in midair were different. Their divine abilities also froze, and the ninth summits, crumbling, also froze at that instant. The churning of the surface of the sea, the howling of the wind, and everything else froze when that voice spoke. The second chapter is here. The third chapter is about to end. Please get monthly votes. To be continued, please. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.